Hello, MythVision. Hello, ATP Geopolitics. This is a co-stream, and I am really, I guess, privileged to have been approached by Derek to do this together with him. What are we talking about, and why are we talking about it? Well, Derek did a video the other day where he interviewed his dad. His dad is a former Special Forces veteran, or he is a veteran. He's not a former veteran. He is a veteran, and Derek interviewed him with regard to the conflict in Israel-Palestine, and that kind of blew up as a video. It's such a divisive subject that, say, 50% of the audience are like, "Yep, totally love what you said there and what you were talking about and the way it was couched," and 50% of the audience are like, never want you to speak about this again. Don't ever speak about this again." So Derek reached out and said, "I want to speak about this again," but in hopefully a nuanced way where he gets to investigate what he thinks and why he thinks what he does, and in a way that we can all talk about this in a frank and open and hopefully sensitive and empathetic way, just to seek greater understanding. And in that vein, all I would ask, I'm sure Derek would ask as well, is that in the conversations, this is a really divisive subject, as you know, in the conversations, the live chats and the discussions below in the threads, just try and be as respectful as possible. This is, as we know, really sensitive. There's some terrible things happening around the world, and just bear that in mind. Anyway, Derek, that by way of introduction for my channel, by the way, Derek runs MythVision, a channel that normally looks at the history and theology of religion with a critical eye. And I've been on his channel talking about stuff like that with all the books I've written on that. And my channel is about philosophy, and I've got a geopolitical channel as well, where I've been talking about the Ukraine-Russia war for the last year and a half. That's the context of who I am. And for Derek, for my audience, that's who you are. Sorry, I've taken up all the time. Over to you, my friend.
No, you're not. You're going to be taking up much more time as we go, because I love your thinking and your reasoning skills. You're critical. I think you're very fair and balanced. And in fact, I reached out to you because I think it's important to express my biases, as we're going to get into this, like where I'm biased, where you're biased, and how we come to try to fairly, respectfully. This discussion is hopefully an exit interview on me even discussing this. I need to explain why I even made the video to begin with, right? I want to ask everyone who watches MythVision to bear with me. I know this is sensitive. Everybody has probably a opinion on this. Wherever you land, you have your view. And I'm going to be way more nuanced today. And the reason I'm going to be way more nuanced is I've learned a lot in the past 2.5 days, 3 days since I made this video. Just in that amount of time I haven't even been scripting. I've been reading books, articles, watching a lot of videos from both sides. And I realized that this is a hot mess. This is not a simple thing. I also need to say a little bit about me, so that people can understand maybe why my video initially with my father even was put out. When I was 14 years old, America was attacked, 9/11. I'm not even entertaining what I would call conspiracy theories here. My father went to war, and I thought Jesus was coming back when all that happened. So there is a sense in which my reaction to this was a trigger. It was a trigger from my own personal experience dealing with the terror that happened due to extreme jihadi, I guess you could say, Islamic ideology in some way. And so I wanted to say that I was so worked up when this first happened. There was no room in my mind to try and think of this rationally, number one. Number two, I also don't know, even with the studying I have in 2.5 days, which is nothing. This is way deeper and way more complex, and there's so much to learn. That's when I realized, oh, hold on. This is bigger and way more messy than just my simple reactions, which come from a bias of mine, rightfully so in my mind, on Hamas. My views of Hamas have not changed. I just want to say that up front. That is my bias. My views of them and what they did, right is right and wrong is wrong to me. And when I say that, what I find is usually there's a conjunction in the sentence from people who go, right, but, and then they want to go back and start bringing up history and bringing up examples of other problems. And then it goes back and forth and it never ends. And so I started realizing, oh my gosh, what is going on here? This is the most divisive, polarizing thing I have ever seen in my entire life. And before I shut up here, Jonathan, and allow you to guide us, because I think you're sober and you're not triggered by the events in the same manner maybe I have been, because of my father having to go to war and almost dying in several situations and stuff. That I have been approached by friends on both extremes. There's the I would call it the extreme Palestinian side that leads to what I would say are what could be potentially, and I haven't investigated them exhaustively, conspiracies. So much so that, like, let me just throw this out there that I've heard from Muslim scholar friends. I'm not going to name names because it's nobody's business, but that Israel is not, or Israelis are not really Jews. It seems that the gist is really they're just Europeans. These aren't actual Jews, which seem to hint at anti-Semitism again, not knowing the history of why they left Europe to begin with in light of what happened with, there's so much complexity to this history, but they're not really Jews. And they're really trying to eradicate all the brown people in Palestine, and that Netanyahu created Hamas in order to assassinate, to cancel out these peace treaties, to try and make, like, how far do you want to go where everything we just saw is also Israel's fault? So even Hamas is Israel's fault. And that is the extreme on one side. Then you have the other extreme that you might find where everything is Palestine's fault. And it's really, you might even catch them say that fallacy that, like, really Hamas is Palestinians. Like, all of them are in this extreme category, and really they're just a problem, and you get where this can go. This
so
creates hate.
I'm just going to interrupt you there, if I may, Derek. So this is something that we need to know about, or need to realize. So there's this fallacy that takes place on both sides, and it is the subset theory. So it can best be exemplified by saying, look, all cats are animals, but not all animals are cats, right? And you see this on both sides. I've called out people for saying, look, all Hamas are Palestinians, give or take. There might be some non-Palestinian Hamas members, but all Hamas are Palestinians, but not all Palestinians are Hamas. So you can't tar all Palestinians with the Hamas brush. But likewise, and I had an argument with someone today who was very much like, had seen the whole hospital claim thing, and we can talk about that a little bit later, and said, right, screw, except with worse language than that, is like, screw Netanyahu, screw Israel, etc., etc. I was like, hang on. Yeah. Netanyahu is an Israeli, but not all Israelis are Netanyahu, or, not all Israelis are extreme Israelis. So you can't tar each of these sides with the extreme brush. Like, right. Netanyahu is a very right-wing Israeli leader that many people in Israel have been very displeased with over the last, many months, because he's sent the country in a direction they didn't want. And so to hold him, or to tar everyone with his brush is the same as to tar every Palestinian with the Hamas brush. So sorry, carry on.
No, I'm glad you step in to point this out, because there's nuance and there's the temptation when a side is hurt. And I saw that interview. In fact, let me share this just to show our audience. There's a few interviews that I really hope people will take the time to go watch. This
is excellent. Really, excellent in both of these. Excellent.
Oh my gosh. Look, if you're a person like me who really wants humans to not suffer, who really doesn't want to see this keep happening, right? It's worth hearing this out. I love what this guy here, Yuval Noah Harari, said. He said something like, the victim can also be the perpetrator. Like, it's not black and white always. And like, and the other thing is like, right now everybody sees red, and your bias is going to come out. and the team that you're on is right and the other team is just dead wrong. And it creates so much hate and division. Right now, that 6-year-old who was stabbed the other day by some, nutty 71-year-old guy who hated him because he's a Palestinian. Like, worldwide, we're already talking about two groups that are minorities in the broad scale of the world. Two groups. Jews who already have gone through quite a bit in World War II, Palestinians that have been going through quite a bit. And look, it's only going to get worse if people on both sides can't try to empathize with the other side. And that's what that video the other day that I was triggered and upset, and it really is showing, like, I absolutely condemn the actions of Hamas, and I wanted to try and give some nuance in my anger on how scary this is now that war is happening. What is the proper procedure? How do we get in, save hostages, help the situation diffuse, but also justice is sought out against the people who committed these crimes?
I think and I think we'll get there, or at least we'll try and get there. I mean, here, this interview was excellent with Harari, who wrote Homo Deus, Homo Sapiens, Homo Deus, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Really, like, a good thinker. He expressed, as you said already, he said most people cannot comprehend that it is possible to be both a victim and a perpetrator at the same time. And you can say that of both sides here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he also said, look, I am, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to
please.
go. Because this reminded me of you when you said, look, that righteous indignation I had when I saw what Hamas did when they went into Israel and did all these terrible things.
Yep.
And then you did that video and you were full of emotion, you were triggered, you were angry, you had that righteous indignation. And if you fill your head with anxiety or anger or any kind of prevailing emotion that can take over you, then you squeeze out rationality, and it's very difficult to have rational conversations with people who are angry, with people who are totally upset, with people who are completely anxious. It's just very difficult. And this is what Harari said, which is basically, and he said, in answer to Alistair Campbell's, both of them did such a good job of interviewing Rory Stewart, who sits on the right, and Alistair Campbell, who sits on the left. They go across the aisle in this and do a very good job. And he was like, look, I am so angry, I don't know what the answer is, or I've known people who have been killed who have been peace loving, wanting to fight for peace, and so on and so forth. And so it is worth understanding how much we can suppress our rationality in light of just really overarching emotions. Right. And the second interview that these guys did was with a Muslim ambassador. I don't know if you got that there as well. Sorry, not Muslim. Palestinian. I do apologize. Palestinian. That's a Freudian slip. A Palestinian ambassador, which was seeing it from the other side of the coin, and that was a fantastic interview as well. Both of them are so good to get a flavor of what it means to be on each of these sides, and he's the UK Palestinian ambassador. But going back, if I may, I don't know if I'm interrupting you for where you were going with that. But
no, I'm just going with the flow. It's
just with all of us watching this, and us too. And I said this in a video the other day. We need to check our biases. Who are we, and what are we bringing to our moral evaluations of what's going on? Right. I'm a white heterosexual humanist, atheist philosopher, middle class from the UK. Right. What does that mean? And Britain's been involved historically with this whole situation. Right. What does that mean? What am I going to be bringing to the table that is going to affect the way I evaluate this? That is very different from someone else, from maybe a Muslim from Lebanon, or a Jew from New York, or whatever. People will be bringing and your political biases as well to the table. Just be aware of that. Just always ask not what I believe, but why I believe it. And if you can just check yourself sometimes and say, right, okay, I think I'm believing that because of this, then you get a better understanding of who you are and how you come to believe things. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about checking biases. I think it's just super, super important. And that was kind of like, I think you had a realization. You said it yourself in that video, which is like, I'm saying this because I had these experiences, right? And that was driving you to say what you said.
And I get it. Even some people had to dip. They said, I can't listen to this anymore. It was so triggering hearing them see my anger and reacting. And I think if anyone listened to it from the start, which some of your audience hasn't, I started out with what triggered me about the actions that took place by Hamas by noticing intellectuals online and people that I look up to defending. This wasn't like I defend Palestinians, as you talked about. All Hamas are Palestinians. Not all Palestinians are Hamas. When you know about Hamas's ideology and some of the extreme levels they're willing to go, even killing civilians, and it's not just by the actions we see now. You can go back in history and see. I think that even in historically the PLO from the West Bank, they've had some actions too, where I even told you over these past few days, I went back and revisited Osama bin Laden's ideology. And he said that civilians in a democracy, they're all guilty. Everybody under a democracy, including children and women, are targets. So no wonder there's no worry on killing people who aren't just soldiers. They will attack anyone with that kind of ideology. You see that overlap with Hamas extremism. And I saw intellectuals that I appreciate and value defending Hamas because of other, I'll call them sins, even though you and me are both secular humanists, because of other sins. And I don't think there's any justification for those actions that occurred that day, even though I know there's trauma and deep-rooted issue on both sides. And I didn't factor that in terms of what I'm dealing with what just had happened. And people would say, well, you're only giving one side of the story. And yes, at the moment I was, but that got lost in the whole video from me being upset from the start that these people were defending the terrorist actions that just took place. And I'm going, whoa. Are you like, look, I get trying to understand and side with Palestinians that part blew me away, that they were actually standing for Hamas. Does that make sense on what made me want to speak up?
Because I think it's a simple use of employing, or it's a simple employment of the moral value system of consequentialism, I think. So consequentialism in morality, so just to let people know, my framework of morality is that abstract ideas don't exist out there, they exist in here. I've said this many, many times. And we construct morality. And also I'm going to add on to that, we construct abstract ideas like borders, right? So national borders don't exist out there. Other than on maps, but the maps are representations of human minds, and we construct the ideas of borders, and then we have international frameworks. But international frameworks come from us having morality that we construct in here. We get together with friends who have like-minded moral value systems, and then we say we then hopefully, as humanity evolves, we move into city states and nation states, and you have democracies, and you say, right, I'm going to vote in someone who represents my moral ideas, and then you vote them in, and then hopefully your morality gets represented by your own government, and then your government, as we evolve even further, we have international organizations like the EU, NATO, UN, OSCE, and whatever, and they create further moral laws out here, right? But these are things that are arrived at by consensus and consent. And the reason I'm saying all this is because it will be very important for where we're going to go with the importance of democracy later on. But the idea is that there are these legal frameworks, but they're only as good as our ability to enforce them. Like, they don't exist out there. We've constructed them, right? Mm-hmm. But once we've constructed them, we then have to enforce them and do something about them. So it is very easy to say, well, Hamas haven't adhered to the rules framework that we all think exists, right? Or that does exist in those structures I've talked about. But then Palestinians would say, hang on, well, aren't there double standards here? Because we've been trying to hold Israel to account for not adhering to those rules, for doing illegal occupation, for doing all of these things that, breaking the Hague, Geneva Convention, breaking all these different rules. And they said, we've been stymied every time we've tried to do something about this. And those big power brokers, the US and the UK, stop us from being able to do X, Y, and Z. And so, rules-based systems are great and they sound great, but they're only as good as our ability to enforce them fairly across the different sides here. But sorry, I know it's a really long sidestep there, but I just wanted to say what a lot of Palestinians or pro-Palestinian people might be doing with regard to Hamas is excusing evils for a greater good, which is to say they are willing to pull the lever so that one person dies to save five, or maybe to let five people die to save a nation or whatever. There is this element of like, yeah, we admit that that's bad, but the greater goal we see as being really good, and sometimes it means that they and this happens so much in life, is that people shout about the means to the end, and you kind of had this cognitive dissonance, this idea like, oh my goodness, like the end goal is good and I want the end goal, but how we get there is a bit crazy, and I'm having to sit there and justify like the murder of civilians in order that this like goal up here is realized, and it just gets into a big old moral mess. Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, this is why I called you. I was like, okay, hold on. The rabbit holes of the complexity of this matter really will show your bias. It really will pull out what you end up siding with and why. Who do you empathize with more? And then you go down different rabbit trails. Like, we'll have endless opinions in the comment sections, I'm sure, even during our stream. Apartheid, occupation, ethnic cleansing. You'll hear this stuff happen from the Palestinian side. And then you might have the other side, like, hey, we were attacked 1967. We had nowhere to go. Britons brought us in. They promised us land. We ended up getting land, especially during colonialization. Now we're here. We're not going anywhere. And no matter what we do, there's an attack that keeps coming. And now we have to fight to defend ourselves. And I mean, like, it goes on and on and on. And then it's like, okay, as soon as someone does try to commit, as I was looking through some of the history, try to make peace and have a peace treaty, that person gets assassinated by someone within their own factions that aren't interested in what they were wanting to agree upon. Is it the 1967 agreement, or are we going back to 1948 and saying they do not need to be on our land at all? We need to get rid. Like, it's super, super complex and polarizing, and it creates so much tension and hate. I've never seen anything like this, Jonathan. And I've seen you talk about the Ukraine-Russian war. You have experience in discussing these things. And you're also a critical thinker. You're not taking sides. You're interested in the facts and trying to get people to see the nuanced complexity. Because once you sent me those interviews, and I heard the UK ambassador from Palestine, the Palestinian, I empathized. There were a few moments you could tell, like they talk about in the show, where he's not budging. He has certain views. And the interviewers did a good job on pointing that out. And they did it in such a soft, gentle way that allows you to see this person. And I felt for him. I felt for Palestinians. And then you listen to the liberal Israeli, who's saying, we do not like our political structure. We do not like the people in charge right now. They're creating a division even in Israel right now. The people in Israel are like divided because of this administration and the chaos that's happening, and how, look, they're not happy with how did this happen to us? This could have been prevented under his administration. Here's how Hamas got in. What the hell happened? You know what I mean? So, like, there's internal blame, I'm sure, on both ends toward the people who did the actions or could have prevented the actions or whatever. And why aren't they going to the table and shaking hands and ending what's happening right now? I just feel really, really bad, because I don't want my words in my other video to possibly be used as hate rhetoric, because there's plenty of that on both ends. And
yeah, I think, as long as we're empathetic and we realize that, I mean, this is the issue, is that it's damned complicated, and it comes down to land essentially. And this is an age-old issue. Maps have changed over eras, right? The European map has changed, and it's quite interesting. A lot of people often say that, oh, it's always so war-torn, that Palestinian area is like, it's no more war-torn, it's no more bellicose and violent than any other place on the planet, particularly Europe. I mean, you look at what's happened for Europe in Europe for thousands and thousands of years, right? That you have big wars to try and establish your power over land, but you don't have a right to that land because rights are constructed here, right? So what really happens is the mightiest win, and eventually that gets normalized, and then you draw lines around where you control, and you say, right, do we all agree on that? You agree on that? Yep. Do you agree on that? Yeah, we all agree on that. Let's draw a map. Right. Should we have an international organization? Yeah. Okay. Should we ratify those maps? Everyone agree that those are the lines. Yeah. But you can go back like hundreds of years that, and someone would be like, hang on, like, I don't agree with that. Like, you just invaded. Do you know what I mean? So we've got a situation in this Levant area, in Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call that area of land, where you've had, we can go back to the Philistines and the Canaanites and the Jews who were around at the time then, and before that, or we could go further on. So you can have Palestinians that say, hang on, this is our land and they'll draw a line in time somewhere, but that's arbitrary. It's like, well, what about 200 years before that? And you can say to Jews, we'll go back to maybe ancient biblical times or a particular point in 1967 or whatever, and say, no, that's the reality. And you're like, actually, that's arbitrary. And I'll let you speak in a second. So the end result is there are a bunch of people who live here. We need to sort out you guys living here together in harmony, because otherwise you've got some options, and these are what extremists like Smotrich, who's a right-wing, the finance minister of Israel, has said, right, either you leave, you become slaves, or we kill you, right? And that's basically what Hamas is saying as well. So like, we can't have that. So the other option is somehow living together in harmony.
I think that he might, and I don't know this, I don't know the guy, but can you imagine exactly like the interview you sent me? It's like a bull looking at red. Like, there is no mercy in their heads right now. And it sucks, because as we watched that interview with the UK ambassador, the Palestinian UK ambassador, you could see the rhetoric sometimes lead to like, we're the victims and they're the perpetrator. And that's it. Like, if you do not agree with that, you are morally wrong. You are the bad guy. That's kind of the hint you get, right? And then the interviewers did a really good job of trying to express like the other side. We've interviewed several from the other side. And if you just listened to them without that, since I'm not an Israeli, nor am I a Palestinian, I can back up. I mean, I had my biases, right? Like, but I can back up, look at this and go, oh man, what did I step myself into? I inserted myself into this simply because of what happened with my father and what's happened to these people. I can empathize with this whole notion of a terror attack that occurred and not even knowing. In fact, just to make one comment on this, I did not realize any of this. In fact, now I know what's been really going on. At least I have an idea of the turmoil that's been going on in history. I did not even know about this like this till this attack happened on that Saturday. So like, you know, a little bit, you know that there's little skirmishes, you hear. I don't even think most of America has ever even known what's been going on till now.
So it's funny you should say that, not funny, like funny, weird. I thought the other day that the silver lining to this absolutely terrible set of events, it could be really positive, as in, and I don't know if this is just really wrong of me to think so, but it's rather like that for the greater good. It could be that the silver lining here is that so many more people get a better understanding of the geopolitical and historical state of affairs in that part of the world, that actually there is a greater understanding in all, and there will be this pressure, international pressure, much greater international pressure from many countries for both peoples to get together and have to sort it out, because all the eyes are on this in a way, especially with social media. I mean, Twitter is afire with this kind of stuff, and that there will be a pressure that might end up more likely leading to a favorable outcome for both sides. But here's the thing, like, there has to be compromise, right? And compromise means that both sides will have to give up something they want. You will not find an answer to this without both sides compromising. And at the moment, there's a situation that seems to be that neither side wants to compromise, is not prepared to compromise.
Yeah.
Hamas is not prepared to compromise, or the Palestinians in general aren't prepared to compromise because of the history of the region for the last 100 odd years. And the Israelis aren't prepared to compromise because of the horrors that Hamas have just injected it into Israel. And the raw emotional reaction to that, because you can understand that the Israelis go, right, this is some they talked about this in the interview you've mentioned, and sorry, I know it's a lot of talking,
No,
but
I'm loving this.
This is called the Hamas trap, which is Hamas would have known what Israel would have likely done in response to doing those terror acts, right? So if Hamas knew what Israel were going to do, or could have a pretty good guess at it, then it means that either they don't care about their own population and they want to use them as a means to an end, that kind of trolley problem, right? They either don't care, or they wanted Israel to do that to their population, because by doing that to the population, it opens up a whole can of worms that leads to exactly what Hamas want, which is total chaos and no peace process.
Now I'm going to throw you a curveball here, because I have been listening to different voices, right? And that Muslim scholar friend of mine who reached out to me, and I think some of his ideas, I mean, just hearing them was like, whoa, that's extreme. Personally, I would need some real clear-cut evidence and not this just be a conspiracy. But I can already hear the kind of response coming from him, for example, and what he would try to do, rather than, why do we keep bringing up Hamas? This is how the tension is, right? Why do you keep mentioning Hamas? Is it because they're Palestinians? I mean, like the kind of tension that comes up.
Because Hamas have done those things, right? And they are the de facto rulers of at least Gaza, right? So Gaza. So,
but he'll flip it. He'll. I'm not going to name his name because I don't want to embarrass anybody. He will say Hamas was created by Netanyahu. This is how far some of this ideology, and I would say propaganda on either side, which is creating a bigger division. Netanyahu created Hamas and in fact may have wanted them to invade. How did they get across the border? So that when they invaded, guess what? Now it's time to go in and attack. And Netanyahu gets what he wanted from the very beginning, to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian from the land. This is the rhetoric, and I'm not the one who made this up. I'm telling you what I'm hearing.
I mean, this is really similar to, actually quite close to the free will debate. So this is the causal chains, right? Which is where you go, look, this person's just murdered my child, right? And you can say, well, we understand why they did that. They murdered your child because of this kind of person, because of these experiences they had in their life, and because of these genetic influences, whatever. It's like, yeah, fair enough. Okay, that may well be true, but this guy's just murdered my child, right? And I need to deal with that. Right, we can talk about the causal variables going back in time, but we still need to deal with this here and now, and we still need to either treat this in a way that we want to act so that it's a deterrent, so it doesn't happen again, or we need to solve this problem of this guy either trying to murder my child or murdering my child. Do you see what I mean? So whether Netanyahu caused Hamas to do that, Hamas have done that, right? And therefore, how do we solve them? How do we stop them doing that again? How do we solve this issue? How do we solve the Netanyahu issue as well?
This is why I feel like I got in trouble with half my audience. The other half, I think, saw it and didn't feel that upset about it. And I don't think it was nuanced. I had emotion, of course, when I did it. But this is the complexity I asked. I asked a hard question. And in many of the comments, when I first started, I stopped answering comments after the first day because it's just too much. It was this. Okay, Hamas did this. Got it. Okay, I understand your voice. Palestinians are suffering, and there's a lot of pain and anguish and history behind that. I get it. What do you recommend the solution to this terrorist attack and the organization of people involved in this? How do you as a nation redeem that? How do you get justice? How do we do this? And when I ask that question, I'm asking sincerely, with the tone behind it, with the hope that they go, okay, we will agree something has to happen. Not, the immediate response I kept getting is just stop the apartheid, stop the occupation. So that's not an answer.
To get angry. It's easy to get angry, but it's more difficult to throw a constructive solution in.
Right. And I'm asking for a constructive solution. I get it. I want those other problems to be resolved, but I don't think it's realistic to ask for the solution and to have someone just throw up, well, stop taking the land. That doesn't solve what just happened here. And I don't think going and blanket bombing innocent people or aiming to try and get bad guys who are hiding in these civilian locations is the greatest idea either. I don't know what the answer is. And that's why this hurts so much, because there are so many people who didn't ask for this.
So this is why it's worth going. I mean, I hate to refer back to those interviews again, but actually it was really interesting in the Harari interview where they're like, what do we do? You know, what do you do now? Where do you go from here? And he's like, I just don't know. And that was, you know, quite eye-opening.
This one, right?
Yeah, exactly. And here's someone who's got a lot of good ideas and is a deep thinker. And he was like, I really don't know where we go from here. I'm so hurt. I'm so angry or emotional or whatever. I've had all these experiences. And going to the Palestinian ambassador, this is where we return to ideas of democracy. So, and it might be worth just explaining a little bit. I'm no expert on this area, by the way, and like you've said about yourself, Derek. So this is the blind leading the blind to some degree. But Hamas. So just to let, if people don't know what and there are problems with these sorts of maps, I do understand they're not ideal and some people will pick issues with them. But here we have, you know, maps over time. We could talk about the Balfour Declaration. We could talk about, you know, 1948, all the different eras or times where different things happened, but you've got a situation where you have at the moment a non-contiguous, which means it's not joined up, Palestine that are enclaves within Israel. And you also have the Golan Heights elsewhere to the north that are kind of taken off Syria. That's a third run. Well, anyway, that's slightly different, but it's like a buffer zone to other countries, to Syria. So, but you've got Palestine split into two, but the West Bank, which is the one on the east here, it's a West Bank of the Jordan. This has been settled over time by Israeli settlers, and it's now split into almost like or over 100 different like Palestinian sub enclaves, if you like, and it's a really big hot mess. Okay, so in 2006 there were Palestinian elections. And in those elections, Hamas were voted in, particularly in Gaza, in the legislative elections. Fatah, which is a more, you know, a proper political party, if you like, under the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is an overarching representation of the Palestinian interest that has now been much more formally accepted by the rest of the world. It was originally seen as a terrorist organization back decades and decades ago, but now is like, this is how to do proper politics. Fatah is one of the main parties. So the Fatah were represented. Well, the President Abbas, who was in Fatah, was voted in as president, but the legislative elections went to Hamas in Gaza and to, you know, other parties in the West Bank. So what that meant is that Gaza were ruled by are ruled by Hamas, and Hamas are effectively an Islamic terrorist organization, and that means that no one in the Gaza Strip has voted since 2006. There have not been elections since then, which means you have no democratic accountability, and you have no one under the age of 35 has voted. And you had a pretty good turnout. You had like a 75% turnout, give or take. So that's 25% of people then didn't vote. So Hamas now in 2023 have no mandate to rule Gaza Strip because there have been no elections. Things have changed. And no one under the age of 35 has voted. So the problem here is that trying to deal with Hamas is incredibly difficult because they, as you said before, they don't want to do peace. But other Palestinians like the PLO, like Fatah, and many in Gaza Strip, we don't want to paint all Palestinians with the Hamas brush.
Right.
there are many who do want to do peace. So either you have a one-state solution. So the one-state solution is that, do you know what? We're not going to have borders here. We're all going to live together as one nation. Or you have a two-state solution, which is there are two nations that will live side by side. I would argue if you're going to have a two-state solution, it has to be contiguous. It's so unfair if Palestine have two areas that are not next to each other. It would have to be contiguous. But anyway, those are the practicalities. But the problem is you need to do democracy, and without a proper democratic system, finding a solution to this is nigh on impossible. Would be my argument.
No,
anyway.
This is a good point, because the way I saw those, there's been a few really interesting, I think, very balanced interviews, as we've shown a few, and there's some more. You should really check out that channel. I've shared the link earlier. But I feel, to use an analogy, here are two people using prison analogy. I'm going to be use prison. Why not? Both have shanks. All right. Right now, one's stronger than the other, but they're fighting. It's getting ugly. And they have their crews. And the prison guards, the nations, the world, they see it. They're not doing much to help stop it. I feel like someone's got to get in there and help them resolve this, because I don't think there's any way that they can. And I think I heard someone say that they were happy to see
that was what that ambassador was saying in that interview, which was like, we need the rules-based order, but we need it to be fairly, doled out across everyone around here, but we need help from the outside to be able to solve this, because do you know what? It's not looking like it's going to be solved between these two entities.
I don't know why this came to my mind. I was thinking back when you said Hamas came in at 2006, and like that's when voting stopped. Is that around the same time that they closed off borders? Because I know that there's the open air prison statement, but if you're a government and Hamas is this radicalist Islamist group that is like running the show down here in the Gaza, would you be interested in having them just freely run into your territory or go into the areas that you might be at? I don't know. And look, I'm not trying to make an argument for one side or the other, because I know that as we see it right now, many people see the setup of the Zionist state, like Jewish supremacy, or like, if you're not a Jew, you're less than, and you're second-class citizen, or something to these effects, the way that it's being painted. I think what you're saying in this, like, coming in, setting up a whole new deal where everybody is treated equal under one state, or even a two-state solution somehow, which I think would make it still complicated. It'd still be more complicated. How many, let me put it another way. How many nations in World War I or World War II fought, millions died, and are living in peace today? A lot. And my point is like, this can be solved right now. I felt like I stepped on a mine, just voicing my emotions and my anger from my experience with my father going to war, and then realizing, oh, this is bad. Like, this is really,
but it is just because it is a moral quagmire, because you can go back, and just to answer your question, 2006 was when it was definitely blockaded more. Like, Israel withdrew troops from Gaza in 2006, and but yeah, it is an open air concentration camp with, I think, 3 entrances. It's blockaded. Israel defined kind of how much water and energy Gaza get. God, it's just a nightmare.
yeah.
We need to step back from that and just think, right, you're humans. We know, like, Britain was heavily involved in this from the Balfour Declaration, and then, walking away and say, we kind of ruled Palestine, if you like, and then said, okay, kind of go and sort it out yourselves. And then Israel, after 1948, there's the Arab-Israeli wars, and then they took on the area, and then so on and so forth. The rest, as I say, is history, but there's a lot of history there, right? And the 6-day war, and then each time maps kind of change a little bit, just to go back to that map again. Each time, each of these moments in history, the map changed, and you had, what was it, 20? Is it after the 1967 kind of 6-day war scenario? I think Palestine had 22% of the land mass, right? And so, the questions are, is that fair? Is what Israel did to the Palestinians throughout all that time period fair? Is what the rest of the world did in siding with Israel fair? Probably not, no. But that's where we're at now. And the issue is you've got a huge amount of Israelis that will argue, hey, but, you know, I've been living here for however many years and blah, 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 blah. But then you've got all these Palestinians. So, yeah, well, I've been living in Gaza Strip, which is the third most densely populated area in the world, 25 square miles of almost 3 million people. And this has been terrible. So you can complain that you might be moved out of your house there that you've been in for all this time. But actually, do you know what? We need to come to an arrangement together where both sides are compromising, and it's just, but it's just such a difficult solution because no one will be perfectly happy.
Oh man, and I feel like apologizing if any of my rhetoric in my anger creates any hate. It's not my intention. I want to resolve this. I wish there was a way to, or at least I'm not going to be able to. Here's the thing. I didn't even have to say anything. It would all play itself out some way, one way or another. I don't think my video is going to change anything that's happened over there, but it might help people to try and step back with me, join me in stepping back and trying to think critically. Unless you're involved, and then I can understand, I can empathize with you. If you're involved on one side or the other, I understand why you can't feel the pain of the other side. But if you're not involved directly, let's try to step back and think about this. I want to point out one really interesting thing about what I have discovered in the past few days of how bad the propaganda is in both directions is how quickly this recent bombing of this hospital immediately was pinned on Israelis. Now it's being pinned back on Hamas. You know, what I immediately saw, and I know there's like an audio that they sent out where they have like Gazan accents and, you know, the Palestinians in Gaza with their accents talking about how they accidentally shot the missile off. Here's the thing. The other side might go, oh, they made up those voices, or they have people who have Gaza. You know, how far do you want to go in not trusting the other side's information? And I'm simply saying, who is there to believe ultimately when there's so much propaganda and division from both sides, painting the other side evil and villain and stuff like that? What do we believe, Jonathan?
Truth is the first casualty of war, right? I've been doing the Ukraine-Russia war for 1.5 years, and I've been doing it a lot, okay? And there is something called 5th generation warfare. So 3rd generation warfare is like how warfare had evolved using high technology, still nations against nations. Well, 4th generation warfare is things like entities like ISIS, who aren't nation states. So you're not fighting against nations, you're fighting against these groups that can go between borders and whatnot. Okay, that's 4th generation warfare. 5th generation warfare is information space warfare. They're fighting over hearts and minds. Information is a weapon in modern warfare. Like, you can be hacked by Russia, and that can do as much damage as bombing hospitals. They can take down a hospital network with hacking, right? So that's cyber warfare. But then so you talk about cyber security, you can talk about national security. There's a term now that's starting to be used called epistemic security. Epistemic security, epistemology in philosophy is a study of knowledge and truth. And I have been on the front line, literally on the front line of the battle in the information space with my channel. My channel has been attacked by trolls. I am dealing with disinformation all day long. And I know disinformation often know disinformation when I see it in the Russian-Ukrainian sphere, but it's easy to get it wrong because it's so sophisticated. Right. That's my preamble to the whole hospital thing. So we can use this as an example, but it will not be the first. It's not the first, and it won't be the last. And be aware of this in terms of the rest of your life in every context. Information is a weapon, and disinformation, the purposeful use of misinformation, is a weapon. Here we had a rocket, almost certainly. I can talk to you about JDAMs, right, which are aviation drop guided glide bombs, and the kind of impact they have, the craters they have, and these types of explosions they have. I can bore you because I've done videos on them on my other channel on the Ukraine war, right? I can bore you with the technical aspects, but I've seen some pretty damn good analysis to suggest from lots of different angles that explosion was not an Israeli JDAM bomb, and was almost certainly one of the 40% of rockets that are fired, because they get them from Iran. They're not very good quality, that has misfired and gone into the car park. So the claim was 500 people died. And for the first 12 hours of 500 people dying in a hospital because the Israelis bombed it, everyone went mental on both sides. and it was used to justify protests, literal protests in Jordan, like sprung up. I mean, they were probably boiling anyway, bubbling over anyway. But this piece of disinformation that was heralded by pro-Hamas trolls online and so on and so forth, and just genuine people who jumped on it because they weren't being skeptical
They're
enough.
caught up in it. Yeah.
You're like, I want this to be true because I'm so invested in this side of the narrative. And had it been the other way as well, like I wrote it. So just in case you think I'm being biased, I wrote an article on Only Sky about the claim of the 40 babies being beheaded.
I'm going to share that right now, just so people can
and how that was almost certainly at least some kind of misinformation that was then exploited. And
he's not saying that babies weren't killed. He's saying that this specific, the way it's being worded and phrased may be tugging. It's probably propagandistic in the way that it may be tugging.
So the original report was some babies. No, the original report was 40 babies dead. Some of them were beheaded. Got turned almost immediately into 40 babies were beheaded, and then it was like reported. It was like third-hand reporting, and then Israelis came out and said, "No, we've got evidence that this happened," and then they walked it back. Biden said it happened. I've seen evidence. Then the White House had to walk it back because they didn't have that evidence. The end result is it doesn't really matter whether that is true or not. They killed 250 people in a music festival, a 4-piece music festival. So, you know, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I don't mean to belittle that kind of activity, but you know, a terrible thing happened. But it's almost so. Harari called it tribalism of pain, which is like it's almost this competition of who can have these bigger horrors to justify dehumanizing the other side, so that you can then do terrible things to the other side. And I know this is probably a really inept analogy, but when I see my twin boys, 13, arguing with each other, and I say, look, you need to stop that now because I know where this goes, and it goes with one or both of you crying on the floor. But no, the argument goes on, one of them escalates, the next one escalates, and there's never anything I can do to stop it, and it ends up with both of them crying on the floor because they've had a fight or something. Well, that is basically this whole conflict, which is tribalism of pain, escalation of horrors, whether they've happened or not, but they can be used to dehumanize the other side so that you can do terrible things to them. And the Israelis are doing that, and the Hamas are doing that. And you know, I say Israelis, I mean the people ruling at the top and making these decisions, whatever. So that is happening until you get to a complete breakdown of like the shit hits the fan.
And that's what sucks for innocent people who are having to live this. We're over here in our safe space, you know, in some other country talking about it. We aren't living it. We're not there. And I'm trying to empathize. So you might hear a weed eater in the back outside. Lawn is being cut, but I really wanted you in here to help bring. Well, I knew you'd be balanced. I knew you'd be fair and trying to have this discussion for people. But I also wanted to vindicate and be a human. Just be myself, be raw, and lay it out there that I hope people, no matter where you land, whatever you lean toward, we all have our bias, to walk with me and not think I'm just cold-hearted, callous, and not trying to understand as much as I can. But I have learned a lot in just these past 3 days since doing this video, where it made me realize I'm not interested in doing this with my channel. My channel is an educational channel that is going to help you understand the ancient literature of the Bible and ancient history and theology, myths, stories. And I plan on getting into much more. But this, I did not realize what this was.
Yeah. But which is, I mean, it is great in a way. It's not great. It's horrific. But if situations like this can lead to us having a constructive conversation, which can lead to people on the stream being involved in constructive conversations themselves, and then maybe moderating their worst excesses, then I think that we can come out of this at least we can come out of this with a better understanding of what's going on in the world, and then we can pressure the right people in our lives to have a better understanding to represent those views as well. So, you know, hopefully, the problem is, you know, what we had this conversation before, Derek, which is, and I think Harari was asked this on the interview, which is, what would you do? Like, you know, if I was Netanyahu or the Israeli leader, you know, Jonathan Pearce, right? I was in charge of Israel, and then Hamas did that. Then, like, forgetting all the problematic things that Israel have done up to there, right? And that Israel should have done X, Y, and Z. I'm not denying any of that, but just let's take the snapshot of when Hamas did what they did. What would I do? And this is the difficulty, and this goes back to the Hamas trap. Like, if Israel react in a very conciliatory, okay, we realize there's a problem, then they will perceive that will be really weak, and that Hamas will take advantage, and that won't be, you know, their own Israeli population would be totally unhappy with that. And so, okay, we've got to be really strong, but being really strong means we need to eradicate Hamas. And here's the problem. How do you eradicate Hamas in Gaza, which is a very densely populated city, when there are tunnels under all these civilian blocks, and you start going into war crime territory because you need to take out Hamas? But if you are going to be serious about taking out Hamas, you will be you will be almost certainly killing lots of civilians. So, but if you go in on the ground with ground forces, so you've got a better chance of taking out Hamas and not civilians, then actually you're going to lose a lot of your ground forces. So you don't want to go and fight an urban battle. They're going to be really reticent to go in because lots of Israelis will die. So the leader of Israel has these options where it's like, right, we need to react in a strong way, which means we need to get rid of Hamas, which means we need to bomb them from a distance, which means there's going to be civilian deaths, which means, is it worth, like, and these are the kind of terrible moral calculations. Like, is it worth it, you know, to kill 300 civilians for the death of 10 high value militants? Like, that's the kind of questions that these people will be dealing with, which is absolutely horrific. And it gets back to that kind of moral lever pulling as to, is that worth it for the greater good? But then if you're killing 300 civilians, then what are their families going to be doing? This is just going to come and bite you on the ass, because all of those people are then going to be, right, you've killed my family needlessly, we're going to join Hamas, and we're going to be, and the whole thing just escalates into an even bigger, I don't want to swear, but an even bigger shit show. And I don't know how you answer this.
I thought you didn't want to. I didn't want to swear. No, you know, this was what, while I was really emotional, this is exactly what I was trying to ask and say. And my father said, "There's no right answer." I mean, the reason I interviewed him is he has experience in combat situation in the Middle East. And he knows what it means to deal with these cell groups. I'll call them cell groups of militants that we're calling Hamas. And like, how do you engage in combat? That, what you just asked, how to use a country in the Middle East. And keep in mind, if you don't do something, not only are your own people going to demand you do something, but the other nations like Iran and other countries, they will absolutely smell the fear. And if you bend over and allow this to happen, guess who? If you did that with them and didn't do anything about it, we're going to step in too, because they don't want them to be there. There's clear evidence they don't want them to be there. And I'm talking about Iran specifically.
Yeah.
Not everybody. So there are different groups, of course, that have different views about the state of Israel or the existence of them living in this land at all. Like, we have peace treaties that we're trying to make up going back to 67. Let's go back to this model. Let's agree upon peace for this model. And then others saying, no, I want them gone completely. Like Hamas would rather see them completely exterminated. And that's unrealistic as well. So this is why you see them like insanely acting out the way that they do. But your question was the one I tried to ask in the video that I think most people probably were just too triggered to even hear. And that was, how do you, Mr. President Jonathan M.S. Pearce, how do you, sir, plan on getting in, trying to maybe get these hostages, get Hamas at the same time, not kill civilians? Give me the right answer. And if you're wrong, You're done. Could you give me the correct answer to this question?
And that's a problem. So humans are really bad at dealing with uncertainty. We're not very good. We love black and white. We love like that's right, that's wrong. I'm fully on board with this. And this is why you over this whole issue, you've had a polarization because you think, right, I believe that Palestine have been oppressed by Israel over the last 100 years or over the last 70 years or whatever. And you're thinking, right, so I'm with them. But I don't agree with Hamas. But then Israel have done this terrible thing by attacking Gaza and killed all these civilians. So I'm really on board with that. Or you're the other way and you're really on board with Israel. And it's that division which leaves this empty, this black hole in the middle that unfortunately there's an inability to cross the aisle. If you want to cross the aisle and do a deal with the other side and you have to cross a black hole, you're going to get sucked in. And it's just, I don't know. It doesn't sound, it's not nice to say there is no solution to this, but I can't see a simple solution going forward. Right. But the solution for me has to involve Gaza having some form of functioning democracy. And until they have a functioning democracy, and this is where like other nations, it should be like, right, we can give you like take down the walls, we'll help rebuild your society, but we'll only give you the aid. I mean, this is kind of what happens anyway. You look at Ukraine's getting a shed load of aid from loads of people, but there will be strings attached. Right. So the EU's giving money to Ukraine, but and the World Bank is giving money to Ukraine, but they have to jump through transparency hoops. Right. You've got to sort your corruption out. You've got to have these democratic mechanisms in place. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. OK, so we'll give you the money. And look, it looks like we're being really moral, but actually we're making you do things. And by the way, we've also got investments in Ukraine too going forward. But that's a whole different story. So when it comes to Gaza Strip, it's like, yep, we'll help rebuild you as an international community, but you have to have a functioning democracy if you want any of this help. And it sounds like bribery, but that to me would be one of the obvious mechanisms, because if you're going to be ruled by a theocracy or an autocracy or a dictatorship or any kind of system like that, you can't be a functioning part of the international community. So democracy, secular democracy, because you've got Palestinian Jews, you've got you've got secular Palestinians. So in a pluralist society, you have to have secular rule, something like an autocracy of Hamas. You know, you can look at the Hamas charter, and I'm sorry, it's not. Oops, that's my one here. It's not particularly cool, the Hamas charter. Like it's not a great read, and that to me is not the way forward, right? So that's what comes out of a theocracy. You have to have a functioning democracy, and hopefully you would get a functioning Israeli democracy as well, where you have a more beneficial government in charge. Unfortunately, I don't think Netanyahu and his very right-wing extremists are the right people for the job. But yeah, right. Sorry, there's a lot of talking.
No, that's well put. I figure you brought up the idea of a secular society. I think it's important we kind of pivot into that, because we'll be kind of circling again and again and again into these hot subjects that honestly, I don't know.
Sorry, before we do that, sorry, I'm really sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
But actually, you mentioned something about different groups in the area, and it is really worth understanding the different geopolitical dimensions going on. So Gaza Strip Palestinians Palestinians in general are broadly Sunni Arabs. You have Saudi Arabia, Sunni Arab, and there's this normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia happening over recent years. And Hamas will be looking at that and saying, we want to undermine that. And in fact, there's a good theory to suggest the reason why Hamas did this now is because normalization talks were taking place with Saudi Arabia, and they want to kind of unseat that so that they can have chaos, and they don't want peace going forward. When you have Hezbollah, who are Shia, Persian, Iranian, you've got Iran, who are Shiites, but they are helping the Hamas, who are Sunni Arabs, and it's a marriage of convenience. happening there because, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But you've got all sorts of funky dynamics going on here where you think, okay, Iran are on the Palestinian side, but actually that's a fairly fragile relationship, arguably. And it's just a complete mess. But it's understanding that part of what is driving Hamas to do what they do, I think, is for this idea of chaos. They want people to lose faith in humanity, lose trust in humanity. They want people to think there's no hope. They want people to think that you just can't achieve peace. And going down that route plays to that Hamas charter that I was talking about.
Yeah, there's so much here. How much of this do you think religion plays a role on both sides? And I just want to say for our audience, obviously, you're going to have certain Zionists who are going to believe it's their moral duty and obligation. God gave them this land, prophecy, you know, they need to fulfill that. We know Christian Zionists in the early 20th century played a huge role in navigating Jews across the world into the land to try and fulfill prophecy. I don't know how much of that is still actively the case, but I imagine there is, that's still alive. And then how much of that do you think on the other side, ideologically, religion plays a role?
It's such a difficult sociological question now. I often talk about the troubles in Northern Ireland, where you have Catholics and Protestants fighting, and you think that's a religious war, but actually it's not a religious war. It's a war of culture. It's a war of history. It's a war of identity. And you know, this is our tribe, and this is your tribe, and you know, you brought over Protestants from Scotland, and this is kind of an oppressive British Empire coming into Ireland, and we want and so religion is there, and it can make people think. I've spoken to family members who said our religion is the cause of all wars, and you'd think an atheist philosopher like myself would be like, yeah, damn it, religion's terrible. But actually, religion causes very few wars. Humans cause wars, and they attach religion to it. Religion can be an identifier. It can throw fuel on the fire. It's not often it's a total driver of a war. However, things like ISIS and Hamas are a little bit more funky because they are truly ideological groups, almost, particularly ISIS, almost without borders, and wanting to have a caliphate. And so, you know, there is an argument, I think, there to be had about the importance of the causal variable that is religion there. But it's really easy to say religion's at fault, but it's usually humans are at fault, and we can just easily use religion as a divisive identifier, although to varying degrees. There will be, you know, it will play a greater causal role in different events throughout history. But here, I don't know enough. I haven't met any Hamas people. I haven't talked to them, but I would assume religion is quite a large part for them. And here's the really important point, possibly not so important for Palestinians in general, outside in the West Bank, Palestinians who aren't big fans of Hamas in Gaza Strip, where they'll be like, do you know what? I want water. I want energy. I want food. I want the right to move around freely. I want aspiration. If you don't have aspiration, you don't have, you know, all the things that you and I come to love in our lives, all the things we take for granted, all the people watching this, all the stuff you take for granted. Imagine just living in the same 25 square miles in those conditions, and you feel that's been oppressed upon you. Is that about religion? No, that's going to be about the day-to-day trials and tribulations of existence. Sorry, that's a lot of me waffling.
That's what makes me want to be a lot more, not a little, a lot more empathetic, to try my damnedest with my bias, you know, to try and understand, like, put myself in their shoes, you know. And then that's not always easy for us as humans to try and look at the other side and go, this is like, if I were in their shoes, I would think justifications. I would find ways to rationalize. This would make sense to me. And then if you go on the other side, you're going to think the same thing. And that's why I love those interviews you sent me, because it's trying to get you to see, oh my gosh, both sides think they're 100% right. Both sides feel completely wronged, and they cannot see the other side. It is impossible, right now, at least it seems, for them to understand and empathize the other side. Being someone who's not directly involved, other than my little trauma with my past of my father having to go to war and stuff like that, and then all that, I would just simply say my backing up and trying to reevaluate and look at this. That is the goal of this discussion. I was hoping with you is to help others do it with me. If you were completely one side or the other, I ask that people do that. So this is such a sore subject, man. It's so sore. I'm sure you got some super chats and I got some super chats, but before we get to them, is there anything we needed to just cover? Because this is my last video that I'm going to be talking about this issue, because my channel is not about politics. It's not. It's really not. This is way outside my field, but I already opened up the can of worms with my other video, and this is me wanting to show, hey, there's a lot I can learn, and I'm sure a lot of viewers can as well. Just don't fall into the trap of being too extreme is my hope to any viewers out there. Don't fall into the crowd of too extreme. And I would say human life, we need to keep as much as possible. And so I really hope the leaders come together. This is my hope, and I'll shut up. I know you do it too, so it's only fair that I get to do this, Jonathan. And that's hog up a little extra space is this. My hope, because I did the whole combat thing with my dad. I was all, what do you do in a war situation? How it gets ugly. Look, my hope is the big brothers that are watching out here, the world at large gets involved, not for combat, to squash and figure out some way to stop this damn thing. Because I don't see it ending pretty no matter what. That is my only thing. I don't know the answer. But I feel like bigger powers need to step in, because it's a suicide mission in the long run for both parties or one party, or it's just not good. And I care about human life more than anything. When I first made this video, it wasn't like crushing Gaza at the time. Like, this has really gotten intense since that video that I did. And I'm realizing this is not going to be good. How many little kids, how many little lives aren't going to be able to experience because of other people's, I'm going to call it bullshit, other people's problems, and they didn't choose that. So, thanks for letting me vent. There's my TED Talk. And now to you, Jonathan.
I mean, we've talked about before that, I don't see any real easy solution out of this, and there will be a lot more pain before things resolve. And I don't know how they resolve. Someone said early in the chat, and I did put the question up, but why is the UN, over time, over history, not really supported Palestinians much? And there is certainly, like I talked about, the double standards of international laws not being applied fairly, and how, you can argue, and pro-Palestinians do argue very much that Israel hasn't been held to account by international legislation. And having said that, and we can also talk, sorry, I'm going all over the place, but we can also talk about how really powerful nations around the world have probably traditionally favored Israel for their own biases. We can talk about our own individual biases, but imagine you've got a country full of people with all those individual biases, and then forming a government and then going and making decisions. So the British with our history and an involvement in the region, and then making decisions, who are we going to favor, the Palestinians or the Israelis, in any kind of parliamentary decision or foreign diplomacy decision. So there needs to be a kind of reckoning day for everyone around the world, lots of nations, to kind of say, and it sounds like real cheap both sidesism here, but it's not. It's literally both sides have faults here, and in order to move forward, everyone needs to recognize that both sides have faults here, and each of those sides need to recognize that in themselves, so that they can move forward and say, yeah, we didn't do that too well, sorry about that, okay. And then you've got to move to a compromise, but you're going to have international organizations like UN getting involved, maybe administering security in that area to start with, UN peacekeepers there, I don't know, but the solution is almost certainly going to involve a lot of the rest of the world. And as I say, it has to it has to involve a political, democratic, free and fair elections and representation for everyone.
You've got to said, no, this is really good. What you just brought up is, for those who don't know, and on your side, they probably don't know my past. Some people are probably new to my channel. I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. This month on the 25th, I will be celebrating 8 years off of heroin, and I was dying. But you brought up something that anyone who might be a recovering alcoholic or addict knows: the experience of a 12-step room. You go into a 12-step room, and there are going to be people that don't believe like you, don't hold to your politics, don't look like you, have different experiences, but we can actually unite on one common thing. And it's almost like its own philosophy you can unite on. We all share in the experience of suffering. We all know what suffering is, and we come in and we share who we are. You know, my name's Derek, and I'm an addict, or I'm Derek, I'm an alcoholic, depending on which 12-step group I've ever visited. I know that the whole God concept can get brought into these rooms. I'm not going there. I'm making the simple point that these steps, there's something interesting in them, and it is sweeping up your side of the street, they call it. And then you really start to recover. I feel you start to have more control over your emotions and how you handle your day-to-day life experiences when you look at your own faults and own up to them. You don't blame. Some things are outside of your control. You make these lists, right? They ask you, your sponsors, make these lists. Some things are just outside of your control. You've been wronged, okay? Those things happen. But your goal is to try and not hold that. That doesn't have a power over you in your life. The goal is to look at your own struggle, your own problems that you've done, and really learn how to forgive yourself for things you've done as well, and make amends wherever possible with other people that you've harmed. That philosophy, scratch the God concept, whether you believe or don't, I don't. That has worked for me and has helped me in all of my kind of dealings in life. I still use it today when I try to do wrong. In fact, today, this video is somewhat of an apology in a way for jumping. I'm being transparent is the point, but also to let you see the humanity that I really don't want death. I want life. I want peace. I want love. I want us to get along. I don't want to see that. So that, I don't know why you made me think of that, Jonathan. I had to bring that up because no matter where you're at, you can find a common solution. And I imagine if there's somehow both can find a common solution or an experience that they can come under together, maybe I just solved the whole problem, Jonathan. No, I'm just kidding. I wish. You see what I'm trying to get at, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, goodness, there's so much to consider in what you've said. In terms of where we've been in this conversation, there's so much we haven't even looked at. I was going to talk about sort of war crimes and nitty gritty of, you know, what is the definition of a war crime? How is it? Are the Israelis justified in targeting civilians, or not targeting Hamas, knowing that they will take out civilians? Where do you draw the line there? And there is a subjectivity around that. It's a very difficult conversation. I've seen that a lot in the Ukraine war, with Russia trying to claim X, Y, and Z.
Can I ask you something about that?
Yeah.
That's important, and I don't want to steer you off this. I think this goes into the vein of that, and you could steer the boat wherever you want to go. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, because I saw in the news the other day, like China and Russia were like vilifying what's happening in Gaza right now. I mean, like they're like saying, whoa, they mentioned some war about completely wiping out a town in like one day, or it was like really quick in German war or something. But like Putin was acting like, whoa, this is unprecedented and like horrible. Now, it's interesting, but I wanted to ask you, because you're on the Ukraine war, did the Russians target civilian locales and actually bomb? I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but I'm wanting you to answer this, because it's like, whoa, what a hypocrite to go on record and like make these statements. And I saw so many people who obviously fall into the trap of that tribalistic one side or the other going, man, Putin makes perfect sense. And it's like, you're listening to a guy who literally is doing this to Ukrainians, correct? Or am I wrong?
It's like listening to Jeffrey Dahmer go, oh, that Jack the Ripper's terrible. Ah, what a horrible human. It's like, yeah, Dahmer. Yeah, really. Because quite frankly, like, you know, you've got to be careful. There is something called the two quoque fallacy. The two quoque fallacy is a U2 fallacy. So you can have, like Jeffrey Dahmer, like a mass murderer, say Jack the Ripper is terrible and shouldn't do that. And you can go, you can't say that. Actually, you can say that. He's just being a hypocrite. But it doesn't mean that what Jack the Ripper did is not bad. It is bad. So you can technically, you can have Putin and Xi Jinping say this is terrible what's going on over here, and then be truthful. That you can't deny. Arguably, you can't deny what they're saying. It is terrible, X, Y, and Z, and you can make an argument for that. However, they are being deeply hypocritical, and particularly Putin here, because yes, so he has. And we can get into the long grass of, you know, war crimes here, but he has used, or his armies have used. I mean, he's done a whole suite of terrible things, and that's why he's got an international criminal court arrest warrant on his head for deporting children. The Ukrainians say up to 20,000 children have been deported into Russia. The number's probably somewhere between that and 6,000 or something, you know, somewhere in that region. But you know, Putin has effectively, the Kremlin has stolen those children and brainwashed them and sent them through filtration camps, so on and so forth. So just that alone. But yes, he sent rockets into, or his armies have sent rockets into places like Dnipropetrovsk or Kramatorsk or Sloviansk routinely. Now, there are nuances here. So you can have a rocket that you know is quite inaccurate. It's called a circle error probable. So you might have a rocket with a circle error probable of 300 meters. That means that 50% of the time, this is a precision guided munition, 50% of the time it will hit within 300 meters of your target, which is itself not very good, because 300 meters from your target could be a hospital, right? But 50% of the time, it can go bloody anywhere, right? And that is still precision. And now, if you've got a better missile to use than that, but you don't use that better missile, you use a shoddy missile and send it into somewhere that you're aiming around a city, and you're trying to hit that target, but you know it's a 300-meter circle error probable, and you know it's got a really high probability of killing loads of civilians. Is it right that you do that, even if you've got a justified military target that you're trying to hit? And this is where you have loads of gray areas. So when you are using weapons like this, you need to consider things, right? So you need to be trying to protect civilians from harm. And what you need to consider is civilians must abstain from fighting. So the civilians themselves can't be actual militants. The party in control of the civilian population must not place them at a heightened risk of harm by using them as human shields. And there's an issue there, but we know that Hamas do that. In terms of Ukrainian, that hasn't been done, although we can argue about certain areas around the edges. And the third point is the attacking force must take precautions using the right missile, aiming for something that's not, you know, wait until that target is not next to a big city or whatever. Must take precautions to avoid or minimize excessive civilian casualties when attacking lawful targets. So you can kill civilians if not only are civilians and guards are not lawful targets, they are also protected under, you know, international law by the law of proportionality. So this rule prohibits an attack against a military target which foreseeably could cause civilian casualties and this is where it's completely subjective, and that's the problem. So are the civilian casualties, are they excessive or disproportionate in relation to the advantage anticipated from the target's destruction? And that's almost an impossible answer to quantify very carefully, because you can say that the Israelis, for example, and I'm pulling this number out of my posterior, so let's use a different example. The British send a missile into the French, right? And we're trying to hit 10 particularly hardcore French people, and we kill 300 French civilians. And the army might say, well, those 10 people were really, really valuable. And actually, the 300 civilians are a collateral that's worth it for those 10 people.
Who makes these decisions, by the way?
So it'll go to the International Criminal Court, possibly, or there will be international organizations that can arbitrate for this. But at the end of the day, it will be people really giving subjective evaluations to that and trying to muddle through this, because the problem is with laws is they don't exist out there. Like I said earlier, it's not like, oh, we can just go to the library of laws and we punch that into a computer and it turns out that you're a war criminal. Like, yeah, he's a war criminal. So we can't do that. So we have to go, right, okay, what's the definition of excessive? Is that proportional? And you'll have arguments for and against, and these can have no clear answer. And what you probably get are people acting with the knowledge that it's going to be quite difficult to define this, and then you have disinformation and misinformation floating about, so that, like, well, we thought there was like we thought that there were 200 militants and 6 tanks underground, blah blah blah. It turns out it wasn't, and we killed 300 civilians. You know, people will try and lie their way out of it. It's a really big mess. But that's a kind of arguments that exist around war crimes when you are striking targets within particularly urban areas where you've got a lot of civilians. So the Israelis are going to be trying to mitigate that, but they'll be saying as much as they can. But the problem is you are fighting against Hamas, who are in the densest populated city, or one of the densest populated areas in the world. There is absolutely no way anyone from Hamas will not be near civilians. So this goes back to the problem I was talking about earlier. So the best way to differentiate between a civilian and a Hamas is by going in on foot. But even that's difficult because you've got women with guns, you've got young people with guns, you've got it's not like everyone's dressed in a uniform. You're going there and telling who, yeah, I'm Hamas, yeah, you've been shot, and you know it's not how it works. Like you go in and it will be an absolute mess, and you will lose loads of Israelis. So the Israelis won't do that. They'll prefer to do it by distance munitions, but the probability of killing innocent civilians then goes up. But it goes back to the question that if you were Netanyahu or you were in charge of Israel, how would you do it? Like, you're in this situation, and many people in the pro-Palestinian front were like, well, don't go and kill Hamas. Yeah, but they've just done this. And you get into the whole, well, how do you deal with those horrors?
Wow. Don't ask me. I mean, like, honestly, I mean, if I was angry up front, it would be just go, right? Like, that's why I made the analogy in my video. I would think if someone attacked my family, and I used this, and people used it for their own, you know, well, that's exactly how Palestinians feel, and then that's why they attacked, and it just endlessly, it will never end if that's the mentality. But
no, and it gets even more problematic because Israel have said, right, we're looking like Hamas. The places we want to strike are in northern Gaza. So can you just move to southern Gaza, all the civilians? You're like the most densely populated city in the world, and you're asking 1 million people to move, like, just down the road. Like the ambassador in that interview you were talking about said that my sister, who's a really loving person, she said, right, we're going to have to take in some people. And how many people did she take into a house? 150. So 150 people in her house because they had, you know, how insane is that? And it doesn't help that Egypt are not allowing refugees out of Gaza. So you're stuck in there, and you're doing war there.
Something's got to give, Jonathan. I mean, at first I'm thinking I could see red. I could see why, as an Israeli, I'd be seeing red, and I could see why Palestinians see red, and it's never going to end. Someone's got to stop. And you know how you talked about earlier, someone's got to be the bigger person. Really, both sides need to see their own play and their own fault and fix their own side of the street. But like, I feel like this is why someone needs to help get involved, like the big brothers, the bigger nations that have more strength need to get involved and try to. I'd love to see these civilians who've been taken hostage find out some way to, like, square this out and really end this thing. I mean,
well, so they were calling for a truce just recently, but even the UK, France, and US have all come out and said no to the truce, as far as I understand it. I think the reasoning is because Hamas have not accepted any responsibility for the terrorists or something like that. But you're right. You're like, then you need to, like, this either goes on, and you know, it's all over and it's a complete shit show, or we stop now and we do something about it, something really meaningful where everyone gets together, and because this can't go on. But again, we get back to, but that will involve compromise. and none of you will be happy.
Nobody's going to be happy with whatever the compromise might be.
Well,
Nobody.
I wonder whether regular Palestinians who are not Hamas might actually be happy, because if they get to
I'm not talking about like just any
Gaza,
individual. I'm saying both ultimate groups involved, right? Yeah, because I think the promise initially was, by an angry Israeli leader, I think it's Netanyahu, said like, we're eradicating them all, right? Like, you made this promise that you're going to take all of them out, yet they have hostages. Yet you're talking about a densely populated area where we don't even have statistics. As I was talking to Dad about, like, how many of them are Hamas? How many of them are like, it wouldn't even matter if someone sided with them. I mean, you're growing up in a society where this is your kind of military force in a way, like, that doesn't matter. If they're not carrying a weapon, they're not actively involved, you don't need to see that. They're innocent civilians, whether or not you want to get into the nuance there. That's the difference.
And you can talk about the moral responsibility of being brainwashed as a child. So I was speaking to someone who the other day at my son's rugby practice, who was like, I had a friend who was out in Gaza in 2007, and he looked out the window and saw on the beach a whole bunch of children doing leopard crawling under kind of fake barbed wire with fake guns to do training for, and you're like, right, so we've got children being brainwashed. So then he said that they will be the ones in Hamas now. Those children that he saw out the window will be the ones in Hamas now. And then you're thinking, then it plays with your ideas of moral responsibility as a philosopher, which is, I can understand how you got to that situation. You can go back and blame Netanyahu for, the Palestinians doing X and Y, or blame the Palestinians for the Israelis doing X and Y, whatever. But we're here now, and we need to deal with that now. But you can understand how they've got there when you've got brainwashing and stuff like that going on with children from a very young age. And you can argue that happens in the education system. Brainwashing happens in maybe other ways in Israel, in much more nefarious ways, much less overt ways. I don't know. That's me trying to think from the other side, that there will be, people's understanding of themselves and their neighbors, Gaza, West Bank, Israel, their understanding will be infused from the surrounding culture. But yeah, that's going off on another big philosophical tangent.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's so much here. I just want people to be aware. I've encountered comments in my videos, and I've encountered people along the way that have extreme ideas. They think Jews rule the world, for example. They kind of have this very hard bend toward Jewish people. And then, there are people online that are very anti-Muslim, like Islamophobic, clearly hate Muslims, and they have the worst possible interpretation for every particular thing you can possibly look at. And this is only going to stir and create more hate across the world. And it's why I'm trying to exit this conversation in terms of, because I don't, I really do empathize. I do want the world to know that. But like, I can't resolve anything, and nothing I'm doing. I'm not interested in doing geopolitics like you are. Like, you're trying to be as neutral, balanced, and unbiased as possible, and give the facts on the ground and get into this stuff. No, thank you. This is there's too much tension, and it's way too ugly. I get enough of that from picking people's ideologies apart through mythology and text and stuff like that. I don't need this. In fact, this is worse. This is worse than any religious criticisms I bring. This is worse.
Someone in my threads, it's a big argument going on. I don't know whether they missed what I said earlier, but talking about Hamas, just to remind people, I did say earlier, Hamas do not have a mandate, right? So 2006 was 17 years ago. People are now 35, have never voted. And even when they did vote, there was 25% of people who didn't vote. Hamas do not have a mandate. So seeing Hamas as completely representative of Gaza Strip in particular, and Palestinians as a whole, is really problematic. So I know I've said that already. I'm just repeating that for that conversation.
Hey, just to give the audience, how you were popping up chats and stuff. So I've noticed people in the chat, and I want to get to super chats here soon, because we got a lot of people who've asked questions and things like that and talk about. But Derek finally admits he knows absolutely nothing. Hey, I don't mind being Socrates, baby. I don't mind being.
Do you know what? I didn't even mean to put. I put that up, and that was a mistake. I meant to put this up, but it's not working. So.
Oh, you just did it. This?
Oh, there it is. It's being a bit funny. It wasn't. That was the one I meant to put up, not the one that slagged you off. So how do you defend yourself against an opposition that uses terrorism to kill your civilians, holds your civilians as hostages, and uses their own population as human shields? Doomed whatever you do. Pretty much summed up, thanks to the little whiskey shop, by the way, one of my members, really appreciate that, is pretty much where I've been going, which is, I don't know that there's an answer to this, because you can't, that's why you need democratically elected individuals to represent your nation states, or your nation, or your group of people, and having terrorists represent you. You're not going to get very far with terrorists who are very openly, when you look at the charter, very openly not interested in doing anything other than harm to you and your nation. So yeah, you are doomed whatever you do. So the key for me is getting rid of Hamas and getting Fatah, getting the PLO to properly represent the Palestinian people, or at least sensible political entities to properly represent the Palestinian people. Then you can move forward. You cannot move forward with Hamas at the helm. And likewise, there will be Palestinians who will say, we can't move forward with Netanyahu at the home, and Smotrich and these other, real extremist politicians in Israel. So I get that too. This is a two-way street.
Sean O'Brien, like this, I don't know if this is at me or something, but I can imagine someone like Adam Green or someone with their toxic anti-Jewishness kind of stuff saying something like, I'm too much of a Zionist to keep doing this. I don't know if that's quoting me or something, trying to make the joke at me, because what's interesting is if I were a Zionist, I would be die hard for and absolutely not trying to take a neutral position as much as possible, even if I have biases. And I've literally said on record, I'm not a Zionist. If you define Zionists that Jews deserve to have a place to live in peace, and sure, I would be a Palestinianist then. Where do you want to draw the line? I want people to be able to do that. I'm one guy who doesn't have the answers, but I do want to get to super chats and
yeah. Can I just say that one last thing there? There was
sure.
I don't know how big a group this is. It might be a really small, very niche group, but there's I keep seeing them on Twitter, X. I keep seeing them on Twitter, and they're called Torah Judaism as their handle, and they are Zionists, self-proclaimed Zionists, that they stand on the Israeli flag and they fly Palestinian flags. It's a really interesting situation, and their claims are that Israel was created by man in 1948 or whatever. It was created by man and not by God. And their position is, we are waiting for the Israel to be given to us by God, as a fulfilling of the covenants. And so therefore we're fully with the Palestinians here, and we're against Israel. And so they end up stamping on the Israeli flag and waving the Palestinian flag. And it's like, wow, I never expected that position to be taken. Anyway, carry on.
No, you're good. You're good. Going up to the top on my end, how many do you have? I've got 32 things showing I need to get through.
Yeah, there's 31. I've got 31. That's all of them.
Okay.
So
I'm thinking,
you can.
Whew, there's a lot here. So we'll just give shout out recognitions to members of the channel. Non-believer, thank you so much. Seriously, been around for a long time. J Nick, I really appreciate you for being a member. Do we want to go through members, or do we want to just go down in sequential order?
You just go down in sequential order. Just give thanks to all those who've been very kind.
Yeah, seriously. Imnag, thank you for the 20. The situation is very complex, but let's take an honest look at what the Zionist movement here is. The U.S. or is the us? I'm not sure. They push Palestinians out of their homes, and so you choke a people hard enough, they will find a way to fight back.
I agree, and that's a problem. And this is the kind of both sides escalation. I'm not. I don't know about you, Derek, but I am not denying that the Israelis have done some pretty egregious things over the last 100 years, right? And that has not helped, or it is indeed majorly created the situation in this kind of way,
right?
And that needs to be solved. Yeah.
See, and here's the thing. I don't know enough of the historical setting on a lot of this, because it sounds like this tit for tat stuff going on. I mean, you go and look at 1948 and what's happened here. This created, obviously, lots of people are moved out of their land. This starts this this huge division. I mean, it probably already had some tension going back to, what was it, 1918, 1919, when Britain in the Zionist movement starts to come over. But like an established state, this creates so much tension. And then you almost look at, like, now there's wars. The wars happen. More land grab happens. Is that criminal in the light of the war? I don't know. I don't know enough to know, how do we reconcile all of this. It just seems like it's just going to keep building on itself. So who struck first? Who's the real problem first? Can we blame Britain for some of this initially? I mean, are we just...
To be honest, most people do with regard to anything. I mean, you look at the Star Wars films, who are the bad guys? The British actors all the time.
I mean, but on a serious note, like, they made all these promises in World War I, and their promises, they promised Arabs and they promised Israelis, or they promised the Zionists, the Jews who were in Europe trying to escape what was happening. Like, both are being promised this same piece of land, and then after many assassinations by Jewish extremists as well as Palestinian extremists, or they're Arabs at the time that were attacking Britain, Britain gets out of the picture. Now there's two people who are now, like, right away at each other's throats, or having to fight and defend. And it's just,
because at the end of the day, you know, people are fighting for their own self-preservation. They're fighting for what they want and looking after their own self-interests, and that's at the heart of these things. And I want this land. No, I want this land. No, but I want this land. And it turns out that we're a bit more powerful than you, so we're going to have this land.
It's not just that. Like, I agree with you, though, that if people were already living there, I don't care who, what, when, where, how. Okay, I would feel, if I were them, being moved from my property or being forced out, morally outraged. I mean, that's an understatement. I would probably try to die or kill for my, for my land. And that's being realistic. I mean, if someone came over here and tried to kick me out of my home and told me, get the hell out, I would defend it, right? I would do my best. So I empathize with that question, and I get it. And it just keeps going. Your turn. You got...
Oh, goodness. You click them all, mate. Take control.
You want me to just click it and you... Okay.
Yeah.
This is yours, though. So
thanks, Aussie T. Brilliant. They'll work it out. Someone said earlier in one of the chats, they both need to take their bats and balls and go home. Like, if it was that easy, wouldn't it be great? But but thanks, Aussie T. Great supporter.
Yeah, thanks for supporting my friend Jonathan.
Disease.
To be honest, that video was triggering. I think they're talking about my video the other day, though I have no agenda. As much as I don't believe in a hell created by a god, I don't believe in creating hell for humans.
Lovely sentiment, yeah.
I agree. And if you're, like, educated in those areas far more than me, forgive my ignorance. And if I'm speaking and you're like, actually, I know this, I've studied the history and I see that they were wrong here, and I'm not aware of it, that's because I'm not aware of it. I'm not up to speed on the whole ins and outs. But no matter what, I don't wish any humans have to go through hell. And that goes back to my philosophy as well. But that's why this is such a tough one. It sucks because it keeps getting worse. Thank you so much. J. Nick, Hamas accidentally bombed a Palestinian hospital and blamed Israel. I appreciate Israel for giving time to vacate.
We've covered that first part. I'm not quite sure what the second part means, but yeah, we certainly covered that. But thanks.
So I think that's you, Eric. In light of the fact that already they're promising to go in after Hamas, they're trying to give them, I've heard this said, that they're trying to say, hey, get out of here. Things are going to get ugly. Here's our advance notice.
Yeah, it's just really difficult. Like I said earlier, when you're asking people to get out of the most densely populated area in the world to another place in that densely populated area, right? I don't know. It's difficult.
Yeah. Appreciate your super chat there. Imnag says, yeah, stop making new settlements. That's a good start.
Yeah, well, you can definitely make that argument, and the Israelis definitely need to. Both sides need to compromise. They need to own up to things that they've been doing and have done, and are probably going to continue to doing until there's a day of reckoning and a realization that they can't continue like that. So I would agree broadly with that.
Thank you, Imnag. Appreciate the super chat. Mr. Monster for becoming a member today. Thank you. I call my son Mr. Monster. I literally go, hey, Mr. Monster. So Interesting. Rest in peace to all innocent civilians, both sides. Yeah, sucks. Paul Gilbert, on your end here.
Really enjoying the conversation. Thanks, Derek and Jonathan, for the mind food. My pleasure. If only it was a more joyful subject, but hopefully it's been mind food for some of you or all of you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Appreciate that, and all the support to my friend Jonathan. Again, subscribe to him if you're a YouTube MythVision person. If you're into this stuff, because you're not getting more of it from me, I can promise you that. I have no interest in going any further into this. I'll be doing my research, but as far as going out and speaking on it, this is it. You get it or you don't, and this is it. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, this is yours, Sid Dave. If Palestine does come into existence, it will be a fantastical jihadist state like Afghanistan, Iran, etc. Fanatical. All those who advocate for it in the West, LGBT feminists, will be the first ones on the firing line. I disagree. If Hamas gets their way, yes, and this is where you've got to be really careful to differentiate between Hamas and Palestine. There's a lot of Palestinians, like that interview with that ambassador, who's really sound. He's an academic and he knows his onions, and he's got a political vision of the future of Palestine that would not be those things. But if you had a jihadist state like Afghanistan, then yes, those people would be in the firing line. So, but we must be careful to differentiate. But not all A are B. All A can be B, but not all B are A. Just be careful with that conflation.
And if my video the other day got interpreted that way, what I was saying, as I said in the video starting out, is those who have liberal values like me and you are obviously in support of LGBTQ. We're in support of these ideas. The people that I said, hey, I respect, very smart people, were defending Hamas. And you could say there's a fallacy here, but they're just empathizing with the suffering and feeling like they need to fight for their freedom or something. But I was saying these very people that you're advocating for, who are terrorists, are also the first people who would kill you for being or advocating for these ideas, which go absolutely against the very things they stand for. And that goes back to the idea that I can agree with the overall intention, as in a free Palestine, assuming that, but although I can't agree if the intention is an Islamic autocracy, but if it's like free Palestine, then yes. But if it's like all of these really terrible things to get there, rather than like a liberal political worldview to get there, then I'm not too sure about that. So I just think
that's where
it would have been better to remain neutral and not go out of your way and not realize like they're not fighting. They might be fighting for some of this, right? They want to dispel the power that is Israel and all that, but like they would be absolutely advocating for things if they did have full control and power over all of it. Let's just imagine they defeated Israel and set up their state and all. You would not be cheering them on. Like it just seemed weird to me. So that's why I made that statement. J. Nick, why would Palestine rely on Israel for necessities?
Because basically they have absolutely no option. It's basically surrounded now. You've got 3 checkpoints. The sea is blockaded pretty much. There are no natural resources. You've just got a city. I mean, you really got to understand what Gaza Strip is. I mean, we're talking particularly about Gaza Strip and not West Bank here, but you've got to understand it's just a big city with no. If you think of how London survives in terms of getting its food and getting, all the road networks, the logistics, the rail, all of those things that help to feed and to fuel and to clothe and everything, all of the stuff that goes literally physically into London, right? You've now got somewhere that's quarter the population of London and a quarter of the size or whatever. So it's basically an analog with London that's just boarded off, just like got walls up around it.
Yeah, that's sad. And this was a question I had. That's what I said. And that was still not fully aware of the whole situation, but I asked that in the video, like, hold on, because people were saying war crimes because they're turning off power, water, gas, all these things. And, you know, I don't really know the dynamics of this whole situation, but I did watch a little bit of a history program, if you will, where they talked about how when the Palestinians were kind of uprooted after, I think it was 67, but it might have been 48. I think it was 67. One of those two wars. And they were told by the other Arab nations, hey, hold up, chill out where you're at. Don't worry. We're going to get the Israelis out of power and you'll be able to establish and be back in the land. So they got stuck because they were going to migrate. You know, migration happened. There were so many migrants all across the world around World War I, World War II, and people trying to get out of their country to find a better place and stuff. And they were moved from their places where they lived and were going to migrate and go into different Arab nations. And they were saying, no, hold up. So they got stuck in this little, like, we're going to wait here until something happens. And from what this video was saying, don't know if this is factual. It seemed like it because there was historians talking on it. But they got stuck. And that sucks. So the whole situation just, I don't know. It's a long history of what the hell happened. You know what I mean? Sorry. All right. This is you, Lawrence 22.
Legend. Thank you very much, Lawrence. So gifting memberships, he's very good at that. I really appreciate you, Lawrence. Thank you so much for all your help and support to the channel, mate. Nice one. Sid Dave, for you, Palestine can only come into existence if it is a secular democracy near impossible with a constitution written by the USA, Israel, liberal Palestinians. Give or take. I mean, I don't know that USA have to be involved there. I think maybe that might be a bit USA centric, but actually I would broadly agree with the general principle that it really does need some kind of secular democracy that is representative for it to survive. For it to come into existence and properly function. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sid. Dr. J, your map's a lie, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I know. So I did give a caveat that there were some issues with any of the mapping you bring up because Israelis will disagree with some elements of the way that they're mapped, and Palestinians would disagree with other elements. I've seen other versions that include like the whole of the Israel country actually covered with the British Palestinian flag of the time. So, you know, yes, there are elements, but the broad idea is it started off like this and then got sort of cut up, and now we're at a place where you've got Gaza Strip and West Bank, and West Bank itself has been split up into smaller kind of subdivisions, if you like, given that there are settlers there and whatnot. So hopefully that's enough caveats to make you happy, maybe. I love a caveat.
Thank you so much. Looking for my mouse. Ozzy T gifted 5 ATP geopolitic memberships. Holy smokes. Is
Legend.
That 10?
Legend.
Serious legend.
It's good help. Thank you so much, Ozzy T. Such a good supporter.
Really. Polly G, can leaders use lessons learned in the South African apartheid end to minimize suffering? I remember Mandela supporting a rainbow nation, not gas whites.
So I guess this is going to have something to do with whether you have a one-state solution or a two-state solution, and different people, there are pros and cons to both of those ideas. It might be that it's too problematic to have a one-state solution, given that you will have elements of cells of jihadists that may still exist. And I don't know, you might want to just say, right, you need to deal with that in your own nation, in this two-state solution. But I guess South Africa has come a long way. I mean, it's not perfect. There are still, you know, governance issues there, I would argue. And don't get me started on BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. But in general, there will be lessons you can learn from there. There'll be, as you said, Derek, there are lessons to learn from the Second World War, where, you know, here we're warring nations with Hitler in charge, and look where Germany has come from now. Interestingly, Germany did I forget the name of it. It's a very long German word beginning with V, which was their process of coming to terms with what happened in World War II. And it was like a psychotherapeutical couple of decades or 50 years for them to get over that, to look in on themselves and understand what happened and who they were. Interestingly, to talk about Russia never did that after the Second World War, which is why they are still pandering to this rose-tinted version of what the USSR was, and why Putin is going back to this kind of glory days of the Soviet Union, because they never went through that inward search for kind of self-realization. And what Palestine and Israel would need to do is go through some kind of process where they understand who they are, where they've come from, and where their own faults lie. Right? Unless both sides can own up to what they've done, you are not going to easily find a solution. And you'll find in the comments here, you'll have people who are still vehemently pro-Israel and vehemently pro-Palestine. I can see it in the comments, right?
Yeah.
And until, for me, it's just like there are very few humans on earth that are just entirely evil or entirely good. Like, yes, you can find some examples, but broadly, everyone's going to have differing variations on those themes. Like these two nations, you're not going to have the clear good guys and the clear bad guys.
Yeah.
Arguably, I would argue that is actually what's happening. I'm going to contradict myself, but in Ukraine, I'd argue that is what's happened, because you've got an invading force that's done that. But in this situation, it's actually way more complex, I would argue. And both sides have been involved in this escalation and this historical kind of ladder to how we've got here. And so they need to go through that sense of coming to terms with what they've done, both sides.
Well said. Zachary Baldwin, I watched my pastor Pat Nemmers use Genesis 12:3 to justify an any means necessary approach in taking the land back. Pastors now cheering war crimes. Damn. Well, that is ridiculous. And in fact, you just did a good video before this video that we're doing here. Not the one on the Ukraine, but the one that you're talking about, kind of the land and how it changed over time. And just the idea. You even bring up some of the interesting scholars that I like, which are leaning in the minimalist camp, or at least the later ideas, where the idea of a unified monarchy of Israel is really a construct of a later author projecting a mythic history, I guess, or they're crafting a narrative about their history of being in the land way back, promised to Abraham. I mean, that's obviously, I think that's fictive. And you see this over and over, and people are using these texts to justify or even advocate for taking land, or that we are the ones who deserve this land, or we were there first. We got a story about.
We live in a pluralist society. You can't just say, my God has entitled me to this land,
right,
and just like move other people off there. So it's like, I live here, you want to live here, or we live near each other. We better get on. Or if we don't get on, we go back to warring tribes. We go back to, you're going to invade me because you want my land. And that we've had millennia of history of that, and it's still going on. You look at Ukraine, you look at all the wars going on in the world, and you look at this one. It's a war over land. We need to somehow get to a point where that's not what's going on. But as we've seen, it's fairly difficult to find that solution.
Thank you. Imnag, at this point, both sides are just blasting each other away. However, Israel has all the power, resources, and support. It might help to give Palestinians a somewhat decent, I think they mean living. It's a start.
Yeah. So, I mean, goodness, there's so many ways that you could take this question. So, there's an interesting sociological understanding of religion, actually. So the least religious countries in the world are the most secure nations in the world. So the Nordic states, for example, are not very religious. And the reason, or wrapped up in that causal bundle as to why they are not religious, is because they have existential security. So existential security is like, I know that if I lose my job, the welfare state is going to pick me up and I'll be able to pay my mortgage, pay my rent, feed my family. I'm not going to literally die, or I'm not going to be living on the streets. And when you have existential security, you're less likely to be scrabbling for comfort elsewhere, or for looking for ways to get you out of that really big mess or whatever. And so there is less of a functional need for a belief in God, right? So, and there's lots more to say about this. There's education involved, there's health, and there's all sorts of other things. Nations that are warring are much more likely. So the most violent nations on earth are also the most religious nations on earth. And it has to do a lot with existential security. So although this isn't a question about religion here, the general idea would be to have a functioning society and people who are not going to want to fight other people for resources or whatever. People need to have a decent living. Like, this is why economics is so important. This is what, the standard of living is so important to give you a quality of life. And you have a good quality of life, you have existential security, you have no need to be scrabbling around and fighting other people and getting really upset with life. If you've got, if you've got a good living and you're able to provide for your family, then you can start moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or whatever, however you understand the needs of the world, the needs of a human. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers at all what is talked about here, but I think Palestinians having a decent, I almost talked a lot about aspiration earlier, like being brought up in a place like Gaza Strip. And, what are your aspirations? If you're in this open air prison camp, how do I make the most of my life given this? And I understand that people are out there that are able to live in a greater freedom, like physical freedom, being able to go for places and do things and become, realize their dreams. It's all part and parcel of this.
Yeah. It also touches on, just briefly, the interviews that you sent me with the idea of, right now, I don't think Israel can see, or at least the powers that be, and probably many of the citizens can see or even empathize, right? We talked about that again, that the pain they're experiencing is not, they aren't feeling the pain of the others, and the others aren't feeling the pain of theirs. And like, there's no compromise on even empathizing overall, which is why I think the major tension's there.
That's what Harari calls the tribalism of pain. Yeah.
Right. That's powerful. So thank you, Imnag. Seriously appreciate it. I wish they would, of course, figure out something. This is the consequence of claiming God gave you this land, which is what we
Yeah.
Okay. Lynn,
thank you, though.
Yeah, Lynn Tudis, I think I'm saying that right. To be human is to condemn both sides in the killing of innocents. Mm-hmm. I agree. You seem to not show any humanity in the displacement of Palestinians by the Jews.
No, I agree that is part of the problem that needs solving. Absolutely, yeah. And actually, you talked about this, Derek. You're very big. You said in fact, you were very clear on how you had that humanity, how you would hate to be someone
if
come
someone
and remove
tried
you from your house.
Remove me. Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I think this super chat came before. I want to give Lynn Tudis.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
This is the problem. When you're talking about this, and the viewers who watch, right, they're quick to jump on anything we say wrong or don't say or don't mention. Why haven't you dwelt on this? Why didn't you talk about that? There's so much to discuss. There's so much to even think about or talk about. And I feel like a lot has gotten lost in that hour and 20-minute video that I did say. It just, as soon as that went, my emotions are coming up about this other thing, and you're forgetting I did mention, and I very carefully caveated the point initially. Those who have liberal mindset, probably secular humanists like you and me, defending, going out and defending, instead of condemning both, they had defended one side. And I'm talking about specifically Hamas. It wasn't Palestinians. They wanted a couple both in the same category. It was really, really like, whoa, that's why I made the video. So anyway, like, maybe I'm just now, I answered that after they super chatted to give Lynn Tudis the benefit of the doubt. But we definitely condemn the killing on both sides. It's just a matter of, this is where it gets rough, Jonathan, is, okay, this just happened. How do we get Hamas? And then what does it take to do that? And,
That's what we talked about before, which is like if that's your goal as Israel, then it's a military goal, and how do you do that in Gaza? So it goes back to what we've already discussed. So yeah,
in light of this too, though, like we want to condemn the killing of innocents, period, in whatever circumstance. We don't like this, but this is where the ugly part of war comes in, because it's like, what do you do then? And the answers are not satisfying. What do we just turn the other cheek? I mean, maybe if you're a Christian who believes that this world is nothing and to lose your life here.
I don't want to sidetrack this discussion, but you could bring in the Americans dropping an atom bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, right? And it kind of bypasses our moral evaluation. And we accept it as it was a good thing because we look at the consequences and say they did that to stop the World War, but they'd already firebombed Tokyo. The Americans had done some like pretty horrific bombing right across Japan. And then the atom bombs. So the firebombing was bad enough. Then the atom bombs, like that was absolutely morally despicable.
Right.
But again, it's that pull the lever. Do you do something bad to bring about a good end? And the justification of that is that it stopped the war and millions of people was saved as a result. Would you feel that if you had your house burned and your entire family destroyed by those bombs? Like, how would you feel about that? Imagine that happened now. Imagine that in order to stop the war going on, that Ukraine dropped an atom bomb on Moscow, right, and killed all those civilians, right? We'd be going mental. But that's what happened in America. And so war, you're right, war brings out some horrific decisions that, you know, at the time is like, that is absolutely despicable.
Yeah.
But now 100 years later, we've kind of almost forgotten how terrible a decision that would be. Like how, oh my goodness, to drop atom bombs on entire cities.
Yeah, and the movie that just came out recently,
Oppenheimer,
such a good movie. And I loved the struggle. He's dealing with a struggle a different way, but like, I mean, he was directly involved in the creation of this death machine we call, you know, a nuke. But they were challenging him, trying to paint him as the villain, and then go, well, why are you changing your mind? I think he's realized, right? Like it was out of his control at some point anyway, but like, it makes me think morality.
Well, yeah, the question is, what's the difference between, from an Israeli point of view, and I'm not justifying this, by the way, I'm saying, is there an analog here? So what is the difference between an Israeli saying we need to kill Hamas because that's the only way of solving this? So we're going to blow up this building that's going to kill X number of civilians so that Hamas dies and we win. Well, I'm simplifying it, really. Right. What's the difference between that and the US dropping an atom bomb on Hiroshima? Like,
I mean, the grand
genuinely.
Scale,
so if you are someone who says that what Israel are doing is disgusting, and yet you haven't said what the US did was disgusting, how are you differentiating those two? I'm just interested in what's going on. I'm not saying one's right or wrong, because actually we can justify the American decision on the basis of the outcome that eventually took place. But did we know that was going to happen? Was that still justifiable? Would you justify that now? I don't know. There's loads of interesting moral discussions there.
You want to stir the crowd up. That's why, like, there's that, right? And there's the war path. And then there's someone who goes, no war, and it's never called for, and it's never necessary. And you got to kind of ask, like, in reality, what if that was you? And I don't know the answer to your own, what you might do. Oh gosh. All right, let's keep moving, because this.
we need to get through it, mate.
Yeah. Blake, thanks, Blake. Ironically, the Holy Land feels like a cursed land. I mean, when you have so many people scrambling over it and fighting over these things, it seems you could look at it that way. Daniel Whitaker, member for 14 months. Thank you so much. Religion is an excuse. Nothing justifies Hamas. Wow. Lynn Tudis, Joshua 24:13, a promise made by some imaginary sky president, and even stupider promise by the British government. Agreed. And we wonder why innocents die. Well said. I think that plays a huge role, at least a catalyst in. Oh God, it's crazy.
Yeah,
you won't be hearing me doing this anymore. So get me while you can. Lynn Tuda says, I could not watch the video with your dad. You showed anger for the Israelis, which I get, but what about anger for the years of suffering for the Palestinians? And so this is a very interesting point, right? That got me into trouble with a lot of viewers. And this is the way I would use an analogy. This doesn't justify. You can have your opinion, have your thoughts. When 9/11 happened, did anyone care about Osama bin Laden's suffering, even when they figured out he was the planned man behind it? Why are everybody worried about why he attacked? Why isn't everybody diving deep into Al-Qaeda and understanding how he saw the problems of what America was doing over here in the Middle East? He was so sick and tired of their democracy. He was sick and tired of everything. Go look into them. Why do we not empathize with him? We're quick, as soon as a terrorist attack happens, to immediately look at the other things. Now, we should, and I rightfully in the past few days have done that. My emotion was triggered by what happened in 9/11 and seeing this, and I made the whole video, Israel's 9/11, right? This could kind of analogize to say, why aren't we sympathizing with bin Laden?
Yeah, I would say there's maybe issues with the logical analogy because we're talking about civilians who are third parties.
I agree.
Yeah,
I
understand
you know how many
the
civilians
emotions
died because America went into the Middle East, of course, in areas we shouldn't have gone. There's a lot of shit that happened because of that. And I'm just saying, if you look at what he did and you realize why he did it, there's some overlap to the things you'll hear Hamas saying that they're doing. And so I'm looking at this going, all right, that was my reaction. And I don't blame you for not wanting to watch it or even ever wanting to watch it to begin with. I was very upset. And this was unprecedented. It hasn't happened to them as far as they can tell in history. This is the first time something like this has occurred. And it made the news, right? The whole world heard about this. All the other skirmishes, we haven't heard about. So there's a bias on my end. There's also my own personal experience that came out, things like that. And that's why I'm also wanting to back off of the topic completely.
Can I just, there's a really good question. I'm not going to answer it. Is it possible to destroy an ideology? It's homework for everyone.
It's what?
Sorry, it's homework for everyone. Anyway, what's the next one, mate?
Yep. Great and important discussion, Nikolai Dimov. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikolai. Very appreciate that.
David the Goliath, if Israel was given to Jews due to some historical connection, why should Ukraine not be given to Russia, as Russians can easily make the same argument? They believe Russian culture began in, is it Kievan Rus? Kievan? I don't know how to pronounce that
Kievan Rus. So that is like a version of the Rus. Russian, it's all to do with Russian Kievan history. Sorry, I was looking at something else. And if Israel is given to the Jews due to some historical connection, why should Ukraine not be given to Russia, as Russians can easily make the same argument? No, I don't. You know, yeah, it's a really good point. And actually, people have been making that analogy before. That there are interesting analogies going like cross-directional from Ukraine and Russia to Israel and Palestine. And I would just say, yeah, it's a real problem to go back and look through history to do these kind of justifications. That's what I was trying to, in my videos I'm starting to do in a series on Israel-Palestine, to move away from like understanding borders as these things set in stone and understanding history as having to define where you are now. Yeah, we are informed by history, but you know, in the Levant at the moment, you've got just humans that are living, and they should be able to live together in harmony, irrespective of who they believed promised that land to them in times gone past.
Thank you so much, David the Goliath. IMNAG, in a much smaller scale, Republicans and Democrats are starting to hate each other like this. Let's just learn from our mistakes.
Yeah. Polarization is a real problem to living harmoniously. Yeah. And I think two parties, I don't want to derail this, but I would say two-party systems are far more vulnerable to the problems of polarization.
Thank you, IMNAG. Stop Scamming Man. Ordinarily, no matter how awful a country's crimes, there is no serious talk of claiming their land by conquest because of it. Only against Palestine is this straight-facedly suggested or defended.
Yeah, so the idea that you've done something bad so we can take your land, I think that's where this guy, or guy, Scamming Man, is going. So yes, I think Again, it goes back to what we've already said, which is surely that there are decent ways to sort this out other than trying to take other people's lands by some form of conquest or by. Agree with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Soda Cabbage 2. Feel bad, but thank you for the humility and standing by principles in the situation. I don't know if it just adds to the complex pot, but it was reported early Hamas may have initially expected to only get a few hostages. What happened?
Well, that's a good point. Like, you might have a situation actually where Hamas accidentally did much better, scare quotes, much better in with their goals in mind than they had anticipated. That actually they got a lot further and succeeded in causing way more havoc than they were intending, and that then unleashed, retribution on a scale that they weren't predicting. But you make your bed, you gotta lie in it, and so again, it goes back to the Hamas trap. What were they expecting Israel to do? Even if they'd expected to only do half of the damage they'd done, still going around shooting people in cold blood, what do you expect Israel to do? Surely you knew they'd react in that way. In other words, the same, I'm going to repeat myself, Hamas trap. Either you wanted Israel to do something back to your civilians, or you didn't care enough that your civilians would be in the firing line. And because you basically want to just shoot peace in the foot, you don't want to go through this process of conciliation with Israel.
Thank you so much, Soda Cabbage. Stop Scheming Man again. While Hamas deserves to be fought, the idea that conquering Palestine is justified because their leaders rejected a long defunct offer is absurd. Conquering Palestine.
Yes. So basically, again, like if Israel want to punish Palestine by somehow, wiping it off the face of the map or something like that. I mean, it depends who you listen to. So someone like Smotrich here would say that that's literally, before this latest iteration of the conflict manifested, he was kind of saying stuff like this as a right-wing Israeli politician serving, finance minister, was basically saying that. But yeah, yes, Hamas deserves to be fought, but can we sit by and advocate that innocent Palestinian civilians would be conquered as a result of that? If that is indeed, now I don't think Israel would be realistically trying to do that. At least most of Israel wouldn't. They realize the international community is looking on, and that involves an awful lot of Muslim nations who would be have very strong affinity for the Palestinian cause here. So, and they're pretty much surrounded by them, and they're trying to normalize relationships with Saudi Arabia at the moment. That's not going to work. And you got Jordan next door. You got Egypt. Is not going to work to. And this is the problem they're in. Like, we want to react strongly, but if we react too strongly, all hell's going to let loose. But if we react too weakly, Hamas will be in the ascendancy or whatever. And there's your dilemma.
Jay Nick, thank you so much for the super chat. Let's take a minute to show support for the innocent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is. Even my reaction initially, Jonathan, was like, all I could see was what happened to the innocent, with Israel. And over the past few days, I've been watching the news, seeing the bombs dropping and things like that, realizing how many people are dying on the other side. And I'm going, damn, it's not so clear, like in terms of the end goal for me. Like it made me go, what? Look, I don't even know the answer to this. I really don't. I just feel bad. It sucks, no matter how you slice it. Jay Nick, thank you so much for that. I hope that everybody can start empathizing. This needs to cool down. Sid Dave, West did create Israel out of guilt of World War II, but it also provides a permanent Western base in the Middle East and easy access to Christian holy sites.
That's interesting. Yeah, you could say there's a geopolitical strategy going on there. So that, just as a sidebar here, the only reason Russia are interested in Syria, the only reason that Russia are involved in the Syrian war is because Syria provide a warm water port in the Mediterranean that doesn't freeze over and gives them access to the Mediterranean and therefore the Suez Canal and therefore the wider world. That is the only reason Russia are interested in Syria. It's the only reason they are supporting the Assad regime. So this happens. This is a thing that nations do, and that's an interesting point there. I've not thought about that. I'll think about it.
Thank you, Sid. Israel must get rid of Netanyahu to move on.
Agreed.
I think that
was easy.
Pretty disappointed right now with what's happened anyway. And
there's a lot of blame going on for Netanyahu. So Harari was talking about that, saying like pretty much everyone I know is not happy with Netanyahu. He's taken the eye off the ball. There's not been enough work to be done. He's been too busy sowing division in his own country, and this is the end result. So there's a lot of blame from Israelis on Netanyahu.
Stop scamming, man. Again, many Islamists characterize all civilian deaths caused by the West as murder, yet cared very little when numerous Muslim groups caused such, and now they aren't even bothered about blatant massacres.
So any kind of extremism in my book is not, I'll tell you what's not high on their list: empathy for other humans. So yeah, I'd agree. You know, whether it's Islamic extremists or any other kind of extremists you can think of, it's not a good way to live.
No, it's not. Thank you, Stop Scamming Man, for all the support. Gabi Rican, forgive me if I butchered it. Super sticker, thank you. I'm in a different category. I hope I didn't miss any comment by you, but I really appreciate the support. Stephanie Ceresi, if I butchered it, forgive me. The occupation of Palestine is against international law.
Yes. So this is very much true. I could read out a whole list of what pro-Palestinians, a whole list of laws that have been broken, UN Charter, Article 2, 4. So basically, what they would say under international law: the Israeli occupation is illegal. The Israeli settlements built on occupied lands is illegal. Israel's claim of sovereignty over East Jerusalem is the undivided capital is illegal. Ethnic cleansing, forced displacement of the occupied citizens is illegal. Israel's legalized discrimination against Palestinians fits in the definition of apartheid and is illegal. So on and so forth. So there are lots of claims against Israel that the Palestinian side will level against them. And this goes back to, well, the only way to find out if that is the case, if they are able to bring that against the Israelis in a court of law, an international criminal court. But that all the stops are put on that by other nations like, you know, UK, US, France, and so on and so forth, who are supportive of Israel. And so there is an inability for the Palestinians to, you know, situation they're in to bring these accusations against Israel. Do I agree that they are illegal? I don't know enough about the legality, but I would be pretty certain that Israel have broken international law throughout history, throughout the, you know, since 1967. So that, again, when it just goes back to that inward looking, both sides need to look at themselves and say, okay, what have we done wrong? We need to accept that in order to move forward. We need to lay everything out on the table. We need to bear ourselves and understand who we are and what we've done. And only after that can we properly move forward and live together, or live next to each other.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it, Stephanie. Alan Bird, imagine if a foreign country could burn or turn off the electricity, etc., to New York at will, yet Israel can in Gaza. There is no equality of oppression here.
It's a good point.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alan. And so it's a really tough situation in Gaza, particularly.
Thank you. Thank you. Niels Clement over there at your side, Jonathan. I don't know Derek from MythVision at all, but interesting discussion between you. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. Really appreciate that, mate. Very kind.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the support over there. Romy Jondorf, Israel, if you free hostages, you get electricity.
So there's an interesting idea that actually maybe the Palestinians could get a little bit of sympathy and capital from outsiders, but also obviously Israelis themselves, if they released the hostages, and that would go a long way to starting a process of reconciliation in some way, or at least lessen the might that Israel, the military might that Israel might bring to bear. So there is a good call for that, certainly, for them to do that. But the problem is, it goes back to the idea that Hamas aren't representative necessarily of all Palestine, and Hamas are Islamic jihadists. So that's a problem.
You see what kind of can of worms this whole thing is? Goodness. Jack Rory, thank you for the super chat. Demographically, is birth rate being weaponized?
I don't know what the context of that question is. I know that Hasidic Jews, actually, some of the Orthodox Jewish communities have the highest birth rates in the world, or they're trying very hard to have lots of babies. I don't know if that's an answer to that. I don't know what the Palestinian birth rate is, so I can't answer that.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that. Romy, again, Palestine was never a country, only a subdivision.
But the answer to that would be, it doesn't matter what Palestine was. All countries started at one point. Like, you could say that of every country in the world. You say, well, it didn't used to be a country. Yeah, but it is now. Or, yeah, but it wanted to be, so much so that it became one. And so what you're saying is they have no right to self-determination. And that's a problem. So I think that's a distinction that is possibly problematic. I don't know. That's my opinion. Though. I've been wrong before.
Thank you, Roman.
It's when I thought I made a mistake.
Stephanie, again, thank you. Genetically, Palestinians are more Hebrew than diaspora Jews. I personally want to just take a jab and go, look, they're both related. Ultimately, we're talking about distant families that are genetically connected in some way down the line, I'm sure. At least for the most part. I guess if the argument is I'm closer related to Antiquity and this somehow gives me pedigree for the land, that's more like almost like a religious heritage kind of claim. I don't know.
This is where we get onto the very difficult discussion of identity and whether you can say who you are or whether there is some objective truth as to who you are. We had this problem with Ukraine and Russia, with the Russians saying, because you speak Russian and because we think you live in a place where that is culturally Russian or was historically Russian before, you are now Russian and you will be Russian. Places like Kharkiv in the north of Ukraine, where they're like, oh, that's mainly Russian speakers, so that we'll easily invade that because they all want us to be there because they're all part of Ruski Mir or whatever, the Russian world. And no, it's not the case, because actually none of them, or a large majority of them, didn't self-identify as Russian. Because do you know who gets to dictate who their identity is? They do, right? So it's not up to Russia to dictate to Ukrainians what their national identity is. If they say, hey, we're Ukrainian, we've got Ukrainian language that we're happy to speak, thank you very much, we've got Ukrainian culture, therefore we're Ukrainian, and we don't want to be invaded by someone who thinks we're Russian. The same applies here. Like, it doesn't really matter about the genetic. I mean, that's an interesting point, maybe. I would find that interesting to look at, but the reality is, if you want to call yourself a Jew in that area, and if you want to call yourself a Hebrew, and you want to call yourself a Palestinian, let's go for it. The key to anything in life is, are you a good person? Like, I couldn't give a monkey's backside whether you are any of those things. What I care about is your moral fiber and how it might affect other people. That's what I care about. So what I want out of this, if I'm like some idealistic utopian, is that everyone's just a decent moral human being, and we go about our businesses being decent moral human beings together. So what is the situation that is most likely to promote decent moral humanity? And that's what we need to encourage.
I don't give a monkey's backside. Stephanie, ironic Israel wants a final solution of Palestinians.
So this is to say that Israelis are it's the parallel to Nazi Germany. So ironic because
I kind of picked that up in the previous one, because this is exactly what the Muslim scholar friend who sent me information was assuming. And in that previous whole ethnicity kind of argument, he out of one side of his mouth was like, "Yeah, these Jews are practically Europeans anyway. Therefore, like, are they really Jews?" I mean, that kind of slam. And I'm going, there's been some serious anti-Jewish or anti-Semitism in the world. Like, can you see the rhetoric here potentially leading to larger hate again for these minority groups?
I wouldn't advocate that kind of thinking.
Right. And I don't think this mentality that, well, isn't it interesting? Israel just wants to genocide all Palestinians. This is their goal. They've been wanting to do it. That's kind of what I'm saying that Muslim scholar was trying to say, is that this is all part of the plan. Don't you know that they wanted Hamas to attack so that they could find an excuse to go eradicate them all? And this is the whole goal. And it's like, oh my gosh, pretty crazy. Anyway, sorry. Sid Dave says Israel-Palestine is complex. Here, immigrants follow the original religion of the land, Judaism, and speak the native language, Hebrew, whereas the native Palestinians speak Arabic and religion exported from Arabia.
Yes, it is complex. Immigrants follow original religion of the land, Judaism. I'm not quite sure how to make sense of that. I'm sorry. I'm trying to parse it. But again, it goes back to I don't really care what they speak and what the culture is, as long as it is morally fits in with my idea of, and I know that's going to be me centric, but I've got to a point where in my earlier atheistic days, I'd be like really trying to convince religious people out of their religious beliefs, because I'm like, you're wrong. Accuracy is correct. Accuracy is important. It's the most important thing, and I need it that everyone in the world has an accurate worldview, and an incorrect worldview is just not cool. And now I've kind of tailored that to chill out a bit more and say, do you know what? You can believe what you like as long as it is morally consistent with my moral worldview, and morality has primacy. So what you speak and how you conduct yourselves only matters. It's this idea of mattering only matters if it has moral implications on others, or doesn't.
Sid, thanks for the super chat. Stephanie again says Palestine has a right by international law to fight.
Quite possibly. Do they have a right to kill civilians in cold blood?
Obviously, no.
So and then where do you go from from those two extremes of doing nothing to doing terrible things? Somewhere in the middle is something reasonable. But again, that's the same also applies to Israel as well.
Thank you. AJ Simo, a donation to the London Pride Brewery. Is that you?
That's thanks, AJ Simo or Simo. Really appreciate that. And cheers to that. Although I was trying not to make a big thing about me drinking, given Derek's background. But
dude, no, I don't. Trust me. People need to celebrate. If I knew how, I'd be having one with you, man. No, don't sweat it. I'm not that kind of guy. Like, it's not like tiptoe around me and don't you do these things that I don't know. It's like, because I can't control myself and I don't even want to play around and pretend like I might one day be able to. That gives no one no right to have to fill it with tiptoes. So enjoy your drink, my friend. Trust me. I get my wife a margarita and wine from time to time. I buy it for her. So do not feel bad. Do not feel bad.
And thanks, AJ. It is an awesome community. I love my community. Really great. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I hope more of my community that's interested in like geopolitics stuff will go over there and check you out, because I'm sure that there's overlap in many ways. And as you know, you've been on the channel, people love you here. So Sid Dave, are Palestinians descendants of biblical Hebrews? I mean, Canaanite, right? There's some connection to the Canaanite.
I mean, you've got all sorts. I mean, you've got movement over time. You've got the Ottoman. You've got through Judaism, or through kind of ancient Israel, and then Hellenized Jews, and then you got as you say, Phoenicians and Philistines and Canaanites and all sorts of different people. Then the Ottoman Empire, and then the Saracens, and then the Byzantine Empire actually before that. So there's all of the above. Yes. Maybe.
Why not? We're all mutts at this point. Olivia Williams, another reason Israel was given to the Jews was to cause the second coming, and it's why they are getting financement from many Christian organizations. I have to agree that there is a lot of Zionist Christian organizations that they see this as the ticket that gets Jesus flying on a cloud back to earth and ending the whole shindig. I do think that that is there. I think I heard a speech once actually saying that some of the motivations, even for Osama bin Laden, you know, in his hatred toward America, plays in its support of the Israeli state and things like that. So, and it has to do with the fact that like there's been a huge backing of the Zionist state and stuff. So, I've heard some speech somewhere in the past, but did you have a thought on that? Or
I was just looking ahead to some of the questions and already thinking of answers. So sorry, I do have a thought on that, and I think it's a real problem. But I might go off on one. Yes, I think that is an issue.
Simple.
Definitely.
Okay. Lynn Tudis, apologies if I was too harsh. I think emotions are high. No doubt. Do not worry about apologizing at all. I get it. Like, I understand. And I'm sorry if I've come across heated in this. So it also makes me angry when innocent kids die for nothing, basically. There has to be a compromise. Goodness.
Yeah, lovely thing to say as well. Yeah, that's great. I totally agree.
Thank you so much. TTT legend. I'm going to call them legends when they join you, and I'm going to call them myths when they join me. So you could be a myth and legend at the same time. How about that? Constellation Pegasus, the United States can be energy independent, but our stupid politicians won't have it. If we were, then stuff like this conflict would be easier on us because the oil producing countries there would have no power over us.
So I know that Constellation Pegasus has disagreed with me politically before when I've been on my channel, actually, on my ATP channel. I absolutely agree with this sentiment. Now, I don't know whether Constellation Pegasus is advocating for you guys to be oil independent, and maybe, but I always thought Obama was spot on and was never allowed to fulfill this, which was to make America the green technology center of the world, because it's all about strategic planning for the future. You say, right, here's where we're going, whether you like it or not, this is where we're going. I mean, you know, I don't like Elon Musk a lot, as all my followers will know, all my subscribers will know, not followers. But he's kind of, he's reading the future and placing, you know, he's doing his strategizing. The US, I think every country should be doing their absolute utmost to be energy independent. And you can do that with the use of, you might need nuclear at the center of it, but, you know, wind and solar is coming on leaps and bounds. Absolutely, because what happened after the Ukraine-Russia conflict started, and it was all about oil and hydrocarbons, oil and gas. What really annoyed me is that Boris Johnson was super strong in the UK and stood with Ukraine. It was fantastic. But then he said, right, we need energy independence. And at the moment, we're getting too much oil from you know, Russia and whatnot. So we then immediately went to Saudi Arabia and places with just as bad human rights records that are just, you know, it's like going, yeah, this is absolutely terrible over there. I think you're disgusting what you're doing. So I'm going to go over here to another disreputable source to just replace the hydrocarbons from there. So it's just like, what? No, this is our chance. You never had a better chance to become energy independent, which should be part of your national security strategy. If you are not relying on other nations, like think about Gaza. If Gaza wasn't relying on Israel for its everything, then it would be in a wholly different situation. But it does, and so that compromises. And he's absolutely right. The US strategy is, well, not just a US strategy. You know, many Western nations or many nations' strategies are compromised by their dependence on oftentimes nefarious actors, because it turns out that most countries on earth with really good hydrocarbons resources end up being anti-democratic or not democratic. There's a really interesting, I was reading a paper recently about the inverse correlation between democratization, so the amount of democracy you have, and, you know, high levels of natural resource, hydrocarbons, natural resource. So you look at, America's lucky. But then you go around, you look at Russia, you look at Saudi Arabia, you look at a lot of places in the Middle East, you look at Venezuela, you look at a number of places in Africa, and you think, yeah, these are not the most democratic places on earth, and they have an awful lot of oil, and we shouldn't be relying on them. So that's my big sidebar. Totally agree. Absolutely.
Thank you. Barack, thank you for being or super chatting. Jonathan, Israel withdrew Gaza in 2005, got rockets and terror.
So yes, I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that. So we go back to 2005. I mean, this was when Hamas got in, or just after that. So 2005, in 2000 you had a second intifada. So that's like a big get up in arms in Gaza. So the 2002 intifada, that's after a visit from Ariel Sharon. Violence and clashes continued until 2005, with hundreds of casualties on both sides. Support for Hamas grows within Palestine because of the willingness to fight Israel due to all of these issues. And then Hamas is then voted in. But then when you look at all of the flashpoints after that, each flashpoint, the number of casualties that died, Palestinian casualties that died, far outweighed the number of Israeli casualties. And there's a real disparity there. There's a real asymmetry there. So when you look in 2008, when you look in 2012, when you look in 2014, so 2014, 2,200 Palestinians, over 2,260 Israelis. So when these flashpoints do happen, the amount of deaths on the Palestinian side are much higher. And then it goes back to this issue, like, well, what do those families and what do those people who've got loved ones and friends die do? Do they end up, are they more likely to join Hamas? Is this just a way of perpetuating the problem? So
yes, and it's just an issue. It sucks, Jonathan. It sucks because it's going to create more hate, and then it keeps you got to fight back, and you got to. So that's why I say someone's got to come in and try to help resolve it. And I mean, that's my opinion. I wish they could self-resolve it, but it doesn't seem that that's ever happened since this has all began. So H. Naftali tweeted, but they bombed the hospital, then deleted it to blame it on Hamas. Plus, the destruction caused by Hamas rockets is laughable compared to what hit the hospital. Why secular Buddha worshipping Israelis near Gaza?
So I'm not really sure. I think this is like the idea that Hamas didn't hit the hospital. I think, we talked about this already. I mean, I can point you towards loads of really good analyses of this. I'm almost certain that it was a stray Hamas rocket. There wasn't that much destruction. The car park, there's no crater. There's a lot of burnt out cars, and there probably is a number of deaths, but it's just impossible for 500 people to have died. It just wasn't how it was originally portrayed.
You also said something about like pieces of the bomb were found, and they were actually Iranian rockets or something like that. Is that
you've got a high flammable explosion? So when you drop a JDAM from a plane, it's a really big bomb, but it's not an explosive fire bomb. It will cause a massive crater, which there was no crater. But JDAMs they cause big craters. These are big bombs. They come in different sizes, but 250 pounds, 500 pounds, and more. The rockets will, especially if it's only just taken off, it will have a lot of propellant that will propel it through the air, right? And if it falls relatively close, which is what they've done with tracing out all the rockets that were sent out, and they all went in these directions, and one of them landed on a hospital that was just in front of it, it's going to have a lot of propellant left, right? So there's a lot of fire to be had there. And what's caught on video is a very fire explosion. It's not a JDAM explosion, which is a type of bomb, as I say. So this is all you piece together, all these bits of the jigsaw. Unless there's more information I'm alerted to, then it's almost certainly a misfiring a Hamas rocket. Now this is pretty normal. This kind of like it's not like, oh my goodness, that stuff happens in war. Missiles fly off and go dud or don't work an awful lot. And some, as we were talking about earlier, there are some analyses that say maybe 40% of the Hamas rockets are doing that. They're not good quality. So I don't know. That's my tuppence.
Thank you, S. Rob, for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Theologian Seeker, as a Muslim, I appreciate Sid's honesty and objectivity. However, let's be straight here, guys. Palestine was indeed a land belonging to the Muslims. It's Orthodox Judaic law to reside under Arab authority.
I would absolutely disagree with that. It's no one's land unless you make it your land. No one has a right to a land objectively. Just like this is why I wanted to talk about how borders don't exist. It's just agreements between people. It's consensus. Like that land is whoever can agree amongst themselves to have ownership over that land. That's how humans work. I mean, we're not even considering animals here, right? But no, that's how history has led towards land being belonging to one nation over another, one group of people over another. But there's no objective idea that that land belongs to, or any piece of land belongs to anyone. It's something that has to be sorted out by humans. It doesn't matter what Orthodox Judaic law is. It doesn't matter what Islamic law says. As far as I'm concerned, in a pluralistic society, that's why we need secular regulations or secular societies to exist, because that's the only way you can navigate people who believe in different gods and different religions.
Thank you. Yeah, that I guess could be a deep dive you could do on your show. And you're doing a series, just in case anyone's interested and you're going to be covering this in depth, right? The Israel-Palestine. Yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah.
If you're wanting to hear what Jonathan says on this, and he's been covering geopolitics and stuff, subscribe to him. Ricky Johnson, just getting here. Looking forward to listen to the whole discussion while I work tomorrow. Love you guys.
Ricky's a legend.
Thanks, Ricky. Appreciate it. Rainbow Krampus, grim reminder, this will eventually be solved by climate change, drying up the Jordan and saltwater incursions into aquifers, making, what is this?
Israel unlivable. Is that not, he's not far wrong. I mean, there is, so Israel, we talked about how Gaza can't produce any of its own stuff. Actually, Israel isn't very good at it has to get its water through desalination, which is a very inefficient way of producing fresh water. It's not a very big country. There's no geographical deep strategic. There's no strategic depth to Israel. If Israel's attacked, like Ukraine is attacked by Russia, it can like cushion that blow with hundreds and hundreds of miles of land, right? And then you can fight, and it's a massive country, so you can. Israel is tiny. Like there's no depth to go back. It's very small, and so therefore it doesn't have huge amounts of natural resources. It's too small to have huge reserves. It's not in the right place. So actually, it is going to be that whole area. I mean, you dam a river like the River Jordan, you dam that at the top because you want that water, and everyone down there will be a huge problem with fresh water going forward in the world, when nations that want that fresh water can dam it at source and then use it, and then the people down river are like, hey, hang on, we've had that for 10,000 years. Where's our water gone? It's like, yeah, it's our water. It's up here. Thank you very much. Water will become a bit like oil, a driver for discord in the world. Anyway, I'm going off on one. Carry on.
Why do you go on? No, I'm just kidding. Sid Dave, Jews looks like the people of the land they come from. European Jews look European. Iranian Jews look Iranian. It is a religion, not an ethnicity.
Yeah, and that's going back to an earlier point made, which is that goes to your identity. If you see yourself as Jewish, then hey, you can be Black Jewish, and that's absolutely no problem. Because it is a religion,
it's
not
a cultural religious.
Although there are some people that say there is cultural Judaism as well, which is based geographically around there. But hey, you can be part of that and a different ethnicity.
Yeah, that's a whole different rabbit trail. Your side, the Little Whiskey Shop.
JP, as you say, morality is in a mind. Different faiths have different moral barometers. Where do you draw the line as what is fine for you is not fine for me? This is why you need secular regulation in your country. We are in the UK not a secular nation, interestingly, but we are effectively secular. The US is a secular nation, but they're striving really hard not to be due to the religious Christian nationalists and so on there. So it is a challenge to all of us to maintain ideas as secularism. It's so important in a pluralistic society. People think secular is to the benefit of atheists, or is an atheist kind of way of thinking. It's not. It's the only way you can navigate pluralistic societies. And if you have people who fundamentally disagree on religion, you need to have somewhere in the middle that is not religious. That is, moral but not religious, so that you can exist as a country and all live together. Otherwise, you just become kind of theocracies and whatnot. So yeah, but what's fine for you is not fine for me. I don't know where you draw the line. I mean, I know for me, but people disagree. But that's why you vote in people to agree with you to enact laws that represent what you believe.
Thank you, everybody, for taking your time. Give me a chance to just kind of vent and tell you what I learned even over 3 days. There's a lot. And Jonathan, I really appreciate you. I mean, you helped me, think through and try to back up, because I have emotional response and felt justified in responding because of the things that happen. And so I just want to say thank you for that. I hope people will go subscribe to you. I hope our biggest takeaway is try not to get caught up in the tribalistic mentality, but have empathy, understand, it sucks.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that sentiment, and it, but part of me is like pretty depressed because it doesn't seem like there's any easy answer to this, and that sucks, because the people who suffer the most and the most vulnerable in society, or almost always, and in this case, people in Gaza are going to suffer the most. There's no doubt about that. But that's not to take away from the suffering of people in Israel at the hands of some of the atrocity, the Hamas terrorists and so on and so forth. So it's the understanding that both sides have issues. Both sides need to be introspective, but there's going to have to be help from outside. And I'm pretty damning of the UN in general in being a bit of a toothless entity, but there needs to be help from entities like that from the outside coming to clear up this mess. Because leaving my two, but if I just close the door and leave my two boys fighting on the lounge floor, then there will be broken bones and bloody noses, and that is just what's going to happen. So actually, at some point, I've got to step in and separate them and say, look, how do we resolve this all together? And
right.
There is this element of like the geographical area needs to come together, the wider world needs to come together, and there needs to be accountability and conciliation and moving forward, and a grand plan for a future, and for what that geographical area might look like for everybody.
Absolutely. And that was a really, really good response, because it couples into that interview. You had me watch both of the interviews, but that was the whole thing. Like, globally, how can we make this bigger? And that came from both of the interviewees, one a liberal Israeli and the other one was the UK Palestinian ambassador. Alan Burt says, if the world condemns Israel's occupation and demands a just solution with the same vehemence they condemn Hamas, then Hamas would disappear. So whichever one you want to, however you want to approach this, because like some will go, well, they'd want to reverse the statement, right? Because some might be just now figuring this out and going, look at what Hamas just did. I didn't even know all this stuff's happening. I think that, like you said, just overall involvement from other people, other nations need to get in and try to help them resolve what they obviously don't know how to resolve themselves. And I think that's going to deal with changing the leadership and how it's structured on both ends, because there's a huge problem on both ends at the top.
That's a really interesting comment there, Alan, by the way. There's a lot to think about in that comment. That's all I'm going to say to that. I'm going to go away and have a big old think about that. John Larkin says this was brilliant. I really appreciate that. But can I just end with this?
Yes.
Derek, if you don't mind. I mean, I'm not one to be self-congratulatory, to affirm my own awesomeness. But
you are awesome.
But JP for world president. I just want to throw that out there. But actually, Michelle Dimitrov has said that, so it's not me throwing it out there. But just thank you. I'll take that.
I mean, not to toot your horn, but toot. No, you really, really are a legend, and I do appreciate you coming in and kind of helping me walk through it, and also letting the audience, experience this with me to understand that, like, I'm just somebody in America who really just, I'm in a privileged position here, trying to, just voice how I felt, and also voice where I'm at and how I feel now. And I feel a little different than I did the other day. Actually, I feel a lot different when you start to take in a bigger picture of humanity and not just the atrocities from one perspective. There's a lot of history here. And I think there's a lot of learning over the years I'm going to have to do as I dive into this. So.
Yeah, and just thanks for inviting me. Thanks for an hour to do this together. Really appreciate that. Thanks to all my guys who have joined in and watched this. And I'm no expert. Goodness me, I'm no expert on this neck of the woods. It's been a learning curve for me as well. But it's just a big hot mess. And I hope we can find a solution so that I hope no more civilians losing their life, as Bilal Hill says. So absolutely. So thanks, man, and take care, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Do you have an outro?
I can sing. I'm pretty no. I don't have
okay, we'll hear you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Love you, and man, let's hope this gets better. So.